Hey guys, tonight we begin a slow, crumb-filled journey across muddy paths, echoing chapels and pockets that smell faintly of baked raisins and regret. You're standing at the edge of a village where even the stones seem tired. It's early morning and dew clings to your boots like curious toddlers. Your bag is lumpy. Your shoes are louder than you'd like. And in your pocket, nestled next to a linen handkerchief and a dried leaf you swear wasn't there yesterday, is a cookie, not a modern cookie. This is a dense, slightly uneven, faintly spiced medieval traveling biscuit. A bit like a granola bar and a communion wafer had an awkward date and neither called the other back. It's been wrapped in cloth and blessed by your aunt twice. And if it breaks in half, someone's getting blamed. You're a pilgrim. Sort of. You're walking to a holy site. Maybe because you swore you'd go if your neighbor survived that mysterious winter cough, or maybe because someone bet you couldn't make it to Canterbury without crying. And let's be honest, you're already misty-eyed and you haven't left the road yet. That cookie is going with you. And no, it's not for snacking. Not really. You know better. This cookie has meaning. It's your backup offering emergency currency potential bribe. And if it comes to that, your last chewy confession. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And comment below, where are you listening from tonight and what time is it over there? Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. You take your first step and the village doesn't cheer. A duck waddles by and ignores you. A child points and yells, "There goes the crumb pilgrim," you pretend not to hear. The road ahead is brown wide and appears to be made mostly of regret and horse leftovers. But as you walk, your thoughts turn inward. This isn't your first time leaving home. It is, however, your first time leaving with a cookie of this magnitude. It's roundish, cracked, a bit sticky on one side. You don't remember why. You consider checking. You choose not to. By the second hour of walking, the cookie is already part of your identity. You've checked on it twice, adjusted its cloth wrap once. You've even whispered to it during a long uphill stretch. "We're doing this," you mutter. You and me. In the next town, you see other pilgrims. Some have scallop shells. Others wear felt hats, shaped like fish. One guy has an entire roast leek pinned to his cloak. It's unclear if that's symbolic or just his lunch. You keep your cookie secret. Because here's the thing, traveling food in the Middle Ages wasn't just nourishment, it was symbolic armor. Some pilgrims wore bread necklaces. Some had sausages cured into walking sticks. One woman in a 14th century account carried a pocket cheese wrapped in a letter from her deceased dog. Yes, her dog could write. Let's not ask. Food on pilgrimage routes wasn't just a survival tactic, it was a statement. A cookie in your pocket that told people you were serious, prepared, and maybe just a little emotionally attached to carbohydrates. And here's your first historical fact of the night. Pilgrims in the Middle Ages often carried hard biscuits or pressed cakes called panis peregrinus, pilgrim's bread. These dense baked goods could last for weeks and were often flavored with herb seeds or dried fruits if you were lucky. You're not lucky, yours tastes like slightly spiced regret, but you love it anyway. As the road winds on, the cookie gets warmer. It absorbs the scent of your cloak, the moisture of your palm, and possibly a small part of your soul. You wonder, would a saint recognize this cookie as worthy? Would Saint Hugh of Lincoln bless it? Would Saint Bridget eat half and save the rest? But not all cookies are holy. You pass a fork in the road where an old man whispers, "Beware the crumb tax." You nod solemnly and walk faster. You're not ready to pay for your sins in oatmeal shards. And here's your quirky detail of the night. In some regions, pilgrims were rumored to trade specific pastries for favors or relics. One 12th century document describes a sugar crust exchange that got wildly out of hand, ending with 3 monks locked in a cellar arguing over fig paste. It's fine. You're not here to cause sugar-based chaos. You're here to walk, to breathe, to protect this cookie. It thumps gently against your chest like a second heartbeat. You consider naming it. You already talked to it. Why not? The sky darkens a little as you reach a resting stone. It's damp, but so are you. You unwrap the cookie not to eat, but just to look. It's still whole, still yours, still slightly mysterious in texture. You start to drift off, not fully asleep, just crumb-level dreaming half-thoughts of flowery blessings and raisin saints. And you begin to wonder, did medieval pilgrims really eat all their snacks, or did some keep them as silent witnesses to the journey itself? Oh, and don't worry, by the end of this journey you'll meet someone who swears their cookie spoke Latin. But that's for later. For now, rest easy. The road is long, but your pocket is warm. You and your cookie are exactly where you need to be. You wake with a stiff neck and a slightly soggy elbow. The cookie is safe. That's your first thought. Your second thought is that you may have just dreamed about a choir of crumbs singing in four-part harmony. A soft wind hums through the hedges and you stretch blinking at a group of fellow pilgrims murmuring prayers as they pass. They look tired, reverent, slightly moldy. Someone sneezes into a piece of cheesecloth. You nod respectfully. You unwrap your cookie again purely for reassurance. It still exists, still mildly fragrant, still looks like it was baked by someone who had access to flour but not hope. You begin walking again. The landscape changes slowly. Trees lean in as if whispering secrets. Stone markers appear at odd intervals, some with carvings of scallop shells, others just vague blobs, possibly saints, possibly potatoes. And all along the way you pass shrines, tiny ones, just nooks in trees with faded ribbons and burnt stubs of candles. At one you see a cracked dish with something very much like a cookie inside. Crumbly, reverently placed. You stop. You look at your cookie, then theirs. You both nod at each other, silently acknowledging that sometimes cookies have jobs to do. Because here's the thing, your cookie is more than a snack. It's your multi-tool. It might be your breakfast. It might be your apology. It might be your conversation starter with a very old monk who hasn't spoken since the Crusades. You've heard the stories. There was once a woman who used her cookie to bribe a gatekeeper into letting her sleep in the cloisters. Another who traded hers for a spoon. One daring pilgrim who used his to distract a goat while stealing a relic. You do not endorse that. Cookies weren't just food. They were part of a pilgrim's toolkit. And you start to notice you're not the only one. There's a man ahead who clearly has a pretzel-like object sewn into his sleeve. Another has flat cakes laced to his belt like edible armor. You pass a woman mumbling to a lumpy satchel that emits faint cinnamon notes. You know that smell. That's clove. She means business. So let's talk about what these cookies actually were. They weren't like the ones we know today. There were no gooey chocolate chips, no soft centers or fancy packaging. Medieval cookies, more like biscuits, really were often hard, dry, long-lasting, and flavored for preservation more than pleasure. Think of them like travel insurance, but edible. And here comes your historical fact of the night. In the 13th and 14th centuries, European travelers, especially pilgrims, commonly carried what was called journey bread or panis ad viam. These were thick, unleavened, often twice-baked goods made to withstand weeks of travel. Some were even pre-blessed by monks before departure. That's right. Your cookie might technically be holy, no pressure. You find yourself imagining the baker who made yours. A weathered woman in a stone house surrounded by smoke and clinking pans. Maybe she whispered a wish into the dough. Maybe she forgot the salt and hoped no one would notice. Either way, it's with you now. Her work, her time, her flour carried forward. At mid-morning, you reach a shallow stream. The bridge is just a plank and some ambition. You hesitate. Then you hop across with a dignity you feel is underappreciated. And there it is, a small wooden sign etched with a scallop shell and the words, 2 buns ahead. You hope it's metaphorical. It isn't. 2 old women sit at a foldable table which seems historically suspicious, selling small round buns wrapped in leaves. You approach cautiously. They nod in unison like synchronized grandmothers. You offer a few coins, they smile. One gestures at your pocket, the other says, "We accept cookie exchange." You pause. You unwrap yours lovingly. They examine it like a relic. One sniffs, the other weighs it. "Spiced," she declares. "Is that?" "Fig, you have no idea." You nod solemnly. They approve. You receive a warm bun in return. It is soft, sweet, and somehow still contains a whole almond. You're not sure how that's physically possible, but you're not arguing. You bite. It's glorious. Still, you save a corner of your original cookie. It feels wrong to part with it completely, like letting go of a friend mid-sentence. You sit in a patch of grass, chewing in quiet communion with a nearby cow, which brings us to tonight's quirky detail. Some pilgrims believed that certain cookies, when eaten under moonlight, revealed visions or dreams of their future path. Recipes were sometimes passed down with ritual instructions like, "Eat only after midnight near running water," or "Never on a Thursday." Honestly, you're tempted. But it's not Thursday and you're not near a waterfall, so it probably wouldn't work. As you continue onward, something shifts. The cookie once heavy in your pocket now feels light. Maybe it's the bite you took. Maybe it's metaphorical. Either way, the road ahead no longer seems so long. A fellow pilgrim catches up beside you. He's dusty, smiling, and humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby about lentils. He nods toward your pocket and says, "That one's been with you since the start, hasn't it?" You blink. How does he know? He winks. "We all carry something like that, only most of us eat it before we're ready." And now comes tonight's open scholarly question. Were these travel cookies truly intended to be eaten? Or were they like relics or pilgrim tokens, more symbolic, meant to be carried as silent witnesses? Consumed only in ritual or kept as souvenirs of the self you don't answer? You just smile, pat your pocket, and keep walking. The cookie stays. You keep walking, but the path changes. It isn't the dirt or the trees, it's the air. It starts to feel watched. Not in a threatening way, more like your great aunt watching you try to slice bread with the wrong knife. Judgy but loving. Possibly spiritual. Possibly indigestion. That's when you start seeing them hidden snacks. Not yours, not anyone's really. Tucked behind stones. Slipped between roots. Balanced delicately on low fence posts. Some are wrapped in leaves. Others just sit naked in the open air, crumbling slowly, content. You pause in front of a particularly bold placement, a small square biscuit lying neatly in a carved groove on a tree stump. Someone even placed a single rosemary sprig beside it. Intentional. Quietly strange. And it dawns on you these aren't abandoned. These are offerings. Not to people necessarily, maybe to saints, maybe to memories, maybe just to the road itself. There's something deeply uncomforting in the idea that you're walking on a path that's been fed for centuries. Like a breadcrumb trail, but instead of leading you home, it welcomes you to not know where you're going. You take out your own cookie and place it in your palm. It's still warm from your body. The corners have softened just a little. You could leave it behind. You really could. But it's not time yet. Instead, you whisper to it, "Not today," and gently slide it back into your pocket. Because let's face it, you're not just carrying a snack. You're carrying a ritual. And that brings us to a little-known, deeply human truth. Throughout medieval Europe, travelers often left behind food at thresholds. Shrines, crossroads, or trees associated with local legends. It was part prayer, part superstition, and part polite insurance policy. "Please don't let me get eaten by wolves. Here's a biscuit." Some monks even recorded seeing clusters of baked goods at well-worn crossing points. There's a famous 12th century note from a Cistercian scribe who grumpily described a rash of unauthorized crumb deposits on the monastery gate. He may have been hungry. You keep walking and soon approach a fork in the road, literally. An actual oversized wooden fork jammed into the earth, decorated with ribbons, feathers, and yes, a cookie skewered right at the top. Someone went through effort, and possibly theology. Two paths stretch ahead, one sun-dappled, grassy, and meandering. the other darker with tall nettles and an uncomfortable silence. You go left because you respect your ankles. A fellow pilgrim sits nearby adjusting her sandal. She looks up and says the right path is quicker. You raise your eyebrows. But the left one is gentler, she adds. Then she gestures toward your chest. Your cookie knows. Trust it. You consider asking what she means, but she closes her eyes and starts humming to a fig. Right, moving on. Your legs ache by midday, but you find a patch of moss and settle. And that's when you spot it carved into a low wooden bench under a tree. Why hide the cookie? It's not signed, just burned into the grain like a tiny rebellion. And suddenly you're wondering, why do we hide food? Sure, for survival, for safety, but also shame-pride strategy. Medieval pilgrims didn't just stuff biscuits in their boots because they were tasty. They did it because food could get stolen, because not every monastic inn welcomed all travelers equally, because some taxes were hilariously based on what snacks you had visible. So here's your historical fact of the night. In parts of 13th century France and the Low Countries, travelers were subject to entry tolls at town gates. These could include coins, labor, or yes provisions. Hiding a better quality loaf or spiced biscuit was common, especially among poorer pilgrims who feared confiscation. One account even describes a woman who wore a hollowed-out crucifix that held 2 honey cakes. Divinely clever. And you walking along this imaginary medieval path feel oddly connected to these crumb-carrying strategists. Because this isn't just a pilgrimage, it's a series of snack-based decisions. Do you eat the cookie now and risk regret later? Do you save it and risk it going stale? Do you trade it for shelter or keep it as your edible diary? Let's talk about what people used to hide cookies in. Boots were common, so were hats, but the most popular sleeves. Pilgrim robes often had wide, loose sleeves perfect for tucking in a flatbread or 2. There's even a 14th century sketch that shows a bearded man accidentally flinging a biscuit across a chapel mid-sneeze. The biscuit landed in a monk's hood. They both claimed it as divine intervention. You remember the old man from earlier, the one who winked at your cookie? He wasn't kidding. These snacks are witnesses, companions, even mirrors in some strange way. You take your cookie out again. It's no longer a simple object. It's evolved. It now carries the scent of rosemary from the offering stump, a smudge from that woman's fig, and possibly a sprinkle of divine judgment from the fork shrine. You don't eat it. Instead, you wrap it tighter. Because now you're wondering, what if it's not for you at all? Maybe this cookie isn't yours to consume. Maybe it's waiting for someone further down the road, someone you haven't met yet. Someone who forgot to pack theirs. Someone who needs to remember that comfort can come in unexpected carbs. And here comes tonight's quirky detail. There are medieval ballads, not many but enough, that describe lovers sending tiny cookies as tokens instead of letters, wrapped in cloth sealed with wax. One was supposedly found centuries later, still fragrant. Experts disagree on whether it was real or poetic exaggeration. You prefer to believe it smelled like cinnamon and heartbreak. By sunset, you reach a hill. A good place to sleep. Soft grass, clear sky. You lie back and feel the cookie press gently against your ribs. Not uncomfortable, just present. Like it knows you're not done yet. As your eyes flutter closed, you hear the faint crunch of distant footsteps. Another pilgrim passing, another cookie somewhere in someone's sleeve, and you begin to wonder how many untold stories are riding quietly inside pocket pastries across the world. The sun returns as a slow drip of gold over the hilltop. You wake with a dew-kissed brow, one sandal half off, and a determined squirrel staring directly into your soul. Your hand instinctively checks your pocket. The cookie's still there. The squirrel blinks. You blink back. Mutual understanding. You shift slightly, the squirrel vanishes, the cookie remains. This morning feels different. Not because the air is crisper or the birds more musical, but because today smells like cinnamon. You rise and follow the scent. The grass beneath your feet is wet but welcoming. A bend in the path reveals a sight that could make any weary traveler weep. The monastery market. It's small, hidden behind ivy-covered walls. There's a crooked sign that reads, sanctum sweets and soap, and you can hear the gentle clatter of wooden ladles and the soft chant of a very tired monk reciting prices. You hesitate. These places are rare and often unofficial. Because here's something they don't advertise in hagiographies: some monks ran secret snack markets. They weren't supposed to. But where there are pilgrims, there is hunger. And where there is hunger, someone eventually makes a gingerbread Jesus and charges a penny. You duck through the gate. There's a small crowd, hooded travelers, dusty children, a goat chewing a price tag. Stalls are made from repurposed hymn stands. Jars of honey glisten in the sun. A row of neatly stacked seed cakes leans precariously near the holy water basin. You accidentally elbow a nun in the search for the walnut stall. She blessed you. You reach a table with a faded blue cloth and an elderly monk who appears to be asleep upright. On the table, cookies, dozens of them, each a slightly different shape, some stamped with symbols, others lumpy with mysterious fillings. You feel your own cookie shift in your pocket, jealous maybe, or intrigued. The monk blinks open, looking for something in particular. You hesitate. He nods knowingly. You've brought one. You slowly pull out your cookie, unwrap it, place it on the cloth. The monk leans in like it's a fossil. Spiced, he mutters. Unbroken, good color. You kept it near the heart. You nod, confused. He places one of his beside yours. It's similar but not the same. Lighter, flakier, with a tiny imprint of what looks like a snail. You whisper, "Is that symbolic?" He shrugs, "Or lunch." You offer to trade. He considers, "Not a full cookie trade, half." So you break your cookie. It cracks cleanly, softly, like it knew this day would come. You place the half beside the monk's offering. He gives you his snail-stamped biscuit in return. He blesses both. "You're now connected," he says. "Should your cookie find its way back here, I'll know." You want to ask how, but he's already asleep again. And that leads us to tonight's historical fact. Some monasteries along pilgrim routes created unofficial blessing exchanges where travelers could trade tokens like bread biscuits or dried fruits for other pre-blessed items. These trades were meant to build a sense of spiritual continuity, and in some regions, the act of breaking and exchanging bread was a quiet sacrament in itself. You wrap your new half cookie carefully and place it in your other pocket. Now you walk with a little more weight, but also a little more wonder. Outside the market, you hear a lute, a broken one clearly. Every third note wheezes like a goat with a cold. But the tune is cheerful. You follow it to a clearing where a group of young pilgrims is dancing in a slow, wobbly circle. They each carry something, one a ribboned stick, another a small round loaf on a string, another what appears to be a shriveled apricot taped to his forehead. You're invited to join. You do, slowly. You're very bad. They laugh not unkindly and start chanting a rhyme. Trade your crumb, don't be dumb. Pass the bite to beat the night. It's absurd. It's probably nonsense. But it sticks in your head. Later, someone sits beside you and offers a square cookie wrapped in muslin. "Want to read it?" she asks. You blink. "Read it." She unfolds it carefully. The cookie is etched not with decoration but with a code. Tiny indentations, cross-hatch marks, a spiral near the edge. "This is a recipe," she explains, "but written in pilgrimage code. You don't speak it. You shake your head." She points out the edges. "These dots mean dry, overnight. This swirl, that's cinnamon. This cross could mean bless before baking or don't use salt." Still debating, she says it's part of a larger project. Recipe preservation via oral cookie transmission. People memorize the shapes, they bake from touch, they pass the cookie, not the parchment. Which leads us to tonight's quirky detail. In certain medieval convents and hermit communities, recipes were coded into the shape, size, and markings on baked goods. These edible scripts acted as both nourishment and preservation, especially when written language wasn't accessible to everyone. Some historians believe this may be the origin of the decorated shortbread in parts of Scotland. You eat half the muslin cookie. It tastes like clove and mystery. You hand the rest back. She refuses. "It's yours now. Pass it along when you're ready." You wrap it and place it in your third pocket. You're starting to feel like a carbohydrate archivist. And here's tonight's open scholarly question. Could edible text truly function as a historical record? Or are we just projecting modern archival impulses onto what were likely just very enthusiastic bakers? The wind picks up. Dusk curls in. A bell rings in the far distance, soft, slow, and far too melodic to be ominous. You walk again. Your steps are quieter, your sleeves heavier, your heart somewhere between amused and moved. Cookies, it turns out, are not just food. They are language. They are currency. They are memory, and now you carry 3. By now, your walk is less about movement and more about momentum. One foot, then another. Not exactly grace, but not collapse either. A kind of determined shuffling like a snail with a schedule. The path curves through open fields where sheep stare with deep judgment and geese hiss with what can only be described as theological disapproval. You nod politely and keep going. In your pocket, you carry 3 cookies, your original half. The snail-stamped monastery biscuit and the coated cookie gifted to you by the recipe preservationist. Your left hip is a confectionery archive. Your right hip is starting to feel ignored. By early afternoon, you reach a crossroads. There's a wooden sign with 4 arms, each pointing in a different direction, each illegible due to time and some enthusiastic moss. But near the base of the post, carved roughly into the wood, someone has written in a shaky hand. Crumbcoat John was here. You stop. You've heard the stories. Crumbcoat John, part folk hero, part warning sign. A wandering pilgrim whose habit of leaving cookie crumbs everywhere became a kind of spiritual breadcrumb trail, and a minor hazard to local wildlife. Some say he was just clumsy. Others claim he was sending secret messages to fellow travelers, coded through types of crumbs: oat for danger, rye for rest, honey for love, poppy seed for free cheese ahead. Of course, most historians dismiss this as romanticized nonsense. Still, the legend persists. You kneel to inspect the base of the signpost. Sure enough, a faint dusting of crushed crumbs lingers in the dirt. You can't identify the flower by scent, but something nutty clings to the wind. You feel for the first time like your crumbs might mean something too. You stand and turn east, not because you're certain it's the right way, but because that's the direction with fewer goose noises. As you walk, you reflect on Crumbcoat John's legacy. Was he mocked, admired? Did he even know he was being followed, watched, copied? And that leads us to tonight's historical fact. In several 14th century pilgrim accounts, there are references to individuals known for leaving marks of passage. While most marked trees or carved initials in stones, a few left trails of food crumbs, dried fruits, or nutshells. Some scholars argue these were accidental. Others suggest intention. Either way, they created ephemeral maps for others to follow. You're chewing over this mentally, not literally, when you reach a wayside shrine. Small, tidy, carved from worn wood. A little statue of Saint Gertrude of Nivelles, the patron saint of travelers, gardeners, and coincidentally cats. At the base of the shrine is a basket of biscuits tied in cloth labeled, "Take one for the road, leave one if you can." You smile. You carefully unwrap your original cookie half. Gently, reverently, you place it among the others. It feels like a funeral and a birthday party all at once. In exchange, you choose a small round biscuit with lavender baked into its crust. You sniff it. It smells like floral tea and forgotten lullabies. Into the pocket it goes. The archive grows. You sit beside the shrine for a while, watching other pilgrims come and go. Some leave bread. One leaves a boiled egg. One kneels and recites a prayer that sounds suspiciously like a recipe for barley stew. Then a small child walks up and places a stone in the basket. Not a cookie, just a stone. And that's tonight's quirky detail. In some parts of medieval Europe, when a traveler had no food to leave at a shrine or resting place, they would offer a stone symbolizing endurance, permanence, or the burden of their journey. In certain records, these stones were later used to build shelters or ovens along popular routes. You wonder how many ovens have been built from the quiet debts of pilgrims. Later that evening, you stop at a modest inn just off the path. The sign swings gently in the breeze, a crude image of a shoe with steam rising from it. You try not to interpret it too literally. The innkeeper is thin-tired and has flour under his nails, always a good sign. He greets you with a nod and says, "Soup's thin bread's honest." You nod back. "Room with a shelf." He grins. "You one of the pocket people?" You blink. "Excuse me." He gestures to your side. "I've seen the bulge. Cookie pilgrims? You folks come through here all the time. Never eat the cookie. Always pat it like it's a pet." You look down at your pocket. Guilty. He pours you soup watery, yes, but with generous pepper, and offers a piece of bread hard enough to be used as self-defense. Then he leans and lowers his voice. "Got a story for you, no charge." You nod eagerly. Crumbcoat John passed through here once. Left a trail from the doorway to the bed. Said it was his way of blessing the floor, but I think he just forgot he had a hole in his sleeve. You laugh. "He left me a cookie," the innkeeper continues, almost wistful. "Wrapped in fabric that smelled like thyme and wet moss. I kept it under the stairs for years. Crumbled to dust eventually. Still smelled like comfort." You finish your soup and ask if the inn has a shrine or basket for trading cookies. He nods toward the fireplace. "Right behind the poker, just don't trade anything with raisins." My dog has opinions. You place the lavender biscuit carefully into the hearth basket and take out a small rectangular bar with poppy seeds. Into the archive it goes. You now carry a collection, your own mobile monastery of memory, a reliquary of flower spice and silent emotion, which brings us to tonight's open scholarly question. Could pilgrim cookies be considered spiritual artifacts? Not merely sustenance, but portable vessels of belief, exchange, and meaning. And if so, why do we so rarely discuss them outside of culinary footnotes? You lie down in the inn's attic room thatch above you, rustling with the quiet scuttling of unseen mice. Your hand instinctively checks your pockets one last time. Lavender, snail, code, poppy seed, half of your original. Still with you, all present, all accounted for. You fall asleep with crumbs on your shirt and a faint smile on your lips, because somehow carrying these cookies makes the world feel softer. You wake to birdsong, gentle and tentative, like they're not quite sure if it's morning yet. The attic air is warm, filled with the earthy scent of thatch wood smoke and, yes, baked flour. Either the innkeeper is already working the oven or someone hid a cookie under the floorboards. Your pockets are undisturbed. The archive remains intact. You stretch, wince at the creak in your knee, and feel the telltale bump of the poppy seed bar pressing against your hip. It's oddly reassuring, like waking up next to an old friend, except this friend is rectangular and slightly edible. Downstairs, the inn is quiet. The hearth still glows with the faint memory of fire. You find a bowl of water left for travelers and a handwritten note beside it, "Wash your face. And your sins if you've got the time." You do both. You repack your satchel. Take one last glance at the hearth basket. Someone's left a fig cake, scandalous, and set off down the path once more. The morning mist clings low to the ground, curling around your ankles like curious ghosts. Each step feels softer than the last. Your feet hurt a little less. Or maybe you've just accepted the pain as part of the pilgrimage package, like blisters, mild revelations, and unsolicited advice from strangers with goats. By mid-morning, you arrive at a wayside shelter, more of a lean-to, really. But it offers a bench of you and a carved message etched into the beams: flour and forgiveness. You sit, because benches exist to be honored. A few moments later, another traveler approaches. Older, wrapped in a wool cloak heavy with rain spots and stories. He nods, sits beside you, and pulls out a cookie. It's a thick, square thing, dark with spice and studded with slivers of almond. "Want to share?" he asks. You nod and in return offer half your original cookie. The half that's traveled furthest softens slightly, but still carries the quiet dignity of perseverance. You break bread together, or at least biscuit. And as the crumbs fall gently, silently, he begins to speak. Once he says, "I argued with my brother over a burnt crust, just a crust. The rest of the loaf was fine, but I blamed him, he blamed me. We didn't speak for 5 winters. You nod, chewing slowly, waiting. One day I baked a new loaf, took it to him, Said nothing, just broke it in half. We ate, that was it. We still don't talk much, but we eat. And that's enough. You offer him the lavender biscuit from your pocket. He declines. Not today, he smiles, but thank you. That's a good one to give forward. You wrap it again and tuck it back into your archive, which leads us to tonight's historical fact. In medieval Europe, bread and cookies weren't just food, they were symbols of reconciliation. In some regions, formal disputes were resolved through the ritual breaking and sharing of baked goods. These peace loaves or reconciliation wafers were sometimes blessed beforehand and carried the implicit promise, if we eat together, we cannot remain enemies. Some abbeys even recorded these exchanges as legal events, not quite a treaty, but something deeply quietly binding. You rise, thank the old man, and continue down the path. He doesn't follow. You look back once, and he's already gone. Only the indentation on the bench remains and a few stray almond slivers dancing in the breeze. Further along, you hear singing, a soft chorus echoing between trees. You follow the sound to a clearing where a group of pilgrims sits in a loose circle, each holding a small baked item in their hands. A woman in a blue shawl leads the chant. "O cookie of grain and hidden grief, may you grant our souls some brief relief." You pause. The song continues, mostly improvised. One verse is about blisters, another about jam. One particularly moving section involves emotional support gingerbread. You sit at the edge and listen. Then someone hands you a small heart-shaped cookie. No explanation, just warmth and sugar. You don't eat it, not yet. It doesn't feel like time. Instead, you hum along. And now for tonight's quirky detail. There are scattered records of crumb rituals among 13th and 14th century pilgrim groups. Some involved singing or storytelling before eating, others included silent sharing of a single biscuit passed around a circle. In some cases, the last person to hold the cookie had to lead the next day's journey or tell a story no one had heard before. You wonder what story you'd tell if it were your turn. Maybe this one. Later, as the group disperses, you ask the woman in blue what the heart shape means. She smiles, taps your chest. It's not for you. It's to remind someone else that yours is still beating. You carry that cookie in your palm for a while before placing it gently into your archive. It fits. Your satchel feels heavier now, but not in a burdensome way. More like you're walking with company. Your steps soften as the sun begins to dip low. And here's tonight's open scholarly question. Were pilgrim cookies part of a broader nonverbal communication system? A form of edible gesture language could shape exchange, and timing have conveyed things that words couldn't. Forgiveness, solidarity, love, or simple presence. As twilight stretches its long lavender arms across the sky, you reach a ridge overlooking the next valley. A bell rings somewhere distant. A dog barks once. A breeze lifts the edges of your cloak and carries the faintest scent of nutmeg. You press your hand gently over your pocket. So many cookies, so many voices, and they're all still with you. Evening settles like warm cloth across your shoulders. The path descends gently into a hollow where mist gathers in pale swirls, curling between the grass like slow-moving thoughts. It's quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of hush. The kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound profound. Your cookie archive sways slightly with your stride. Lavender code, poppy seed, snail-stamped, half of the original, heart-shaped. Each one carried for a reason you don't fully understand, yet somehow can't question. You think of the woman in blue and her soft smile. It's not for you. The heart cookie presses gently against your side. A reminder, or a reassurance, or maybe just a shape in dough that has decided to be something more. You reach a low stone wall. Beyond it, rows of candles flicker in hanging lanterns, dancing like fireflies with commitment issues. The glow outlines the silhouette of a building, round, wooden, and utterly strange. It looks like a chapel. It sounds like a tavern. Inside, the air smells like rosemary and stories. You push the door open. Laughter greets you, followed by the thunk of a tankard, a loud amen, and the unmistakable scent of buttered dough. This is not a typical holy place. There are pews, but they've been converted into benches with cushions. There's a pulpit, but it's currently being used as a cookie display stand. A chalkboard hangs near the door. It reads, "Confession and crumble night, bring your own dough." A woman in an apron waves you in. New to the road, she asks. You hesitate, then nod. She smiles. "Well, bless your crumbs. Take a seat. Everyone tells one story and everyone brings one treat. That's the rule." You sit near the back, unsure whether to feel reverent or hungry. A man at the front stands and holds up a flattened round biscuit with scorch marks. This, he says solemnly, was supposed to be lemon. I forgot the lemon. Laughter, a round of clapping. He continues. But I ate it anyway, because sometimes life hands you bread and you just pretend it's cake. He bows. Someone near the window wipes their eyes. Another woman stands. She holds a small square cookie tied with a string. I haven't eaten this yet. It was given to me by a stranger after I got lost in the hills. I think he was a shepherd, or a ghost, possibly both. Polite murmurs, nods of understanding. You realize no one's here to impress, they're here to remember, and maybe forget, just for a little while. You pull the code cookie from your pocket. You hold it in your palm, you say nothing, you just show it. Gasps, one low whistle. A man leans forward and whispers, "I haven't seen spiral script in years." You sit back, letting the room take it in. You're not the storyteller tonight. The cookie is. After the session ends, people begin trading. Quietly, carefully, no pressure, just possibility. A young pilgrim with a basket offers you a triangle-shaped tart filled with something purplish. You offer your snail-stamped biscuit in return. He accepts it like you've handed him a compass. The tart smells of elderberry and long walks. Into the archive it goes. That leads us to tonight's historical fact. In certain parts of medieval Germany and the Low Countries, pilgrims would host evening crumb circles or storytelling feasts, especially near rest points or shrines. Each pilgrim was expected to contribute a baked item and a tale, either personal, poetic, or fantastical. The tradition was part sustenance, part folklore preservation, and part communal therapy. You didn't know you needed therapy until you joined one of these circles. Now your chest feels both full and a little lighter. You leave the cookie chapel under a night sky, streaked with stars like flour across a dark table. The trail glows faintly in the moonlight. You walk slowly, there's no rush. Each step presses soft dirt into memory. Eventually you stop at a grove of trees with low-hanging branches and mossy trunks. You unroll your cloak and prepare for sleep. But before you lie down, you pull out the heart cookie. You hold it gently. Then after a long moment, you break off the smallest corner. It tastes like honey and thyme, like something meant for someone else, but also maybe just for you. You place the rest of the cookie in the crook of a tree. Not an offering, not exactly, just a gesture, an echo of something kind. You lie back. The moss is cool, the stars are curious. A faint breeze rustles your cloak and reminds you that you're still very much on the road. And now for tonight's quirky detail. In some regions of medieval France and Italy, pilgrims believed that eating a cookie or piece of bread beneath a tree would help them remember their dreams, and that placing a piece in the tree would allow others to borrow a fragment of that dream. The tree, it was said, collected the crumbs and whispered them to the birds. So if you dream of cookies tonight, know that a sparrow somewhere may be dreaming with you. And finally, tonight's open scholarly question. Were these baked rituals expressions of collective memory or individual longing? Do we project community into cookies because we want to believe in shared sweetness? Or did those crumbs really connect strangers in ways we've forgotten how to measure? You drift off to sleep with elderberry on your breath, and the sound of invisible birds rehearsing lullabies overhead. You wake to the sound of soft pecking. A bird small, smug, and suspiciously round is hopping near the tree where you left your heart cookie. It pecks once more, then looks at you like it's expecting a tip. You nod politely. It flutters away, presumably to write a dream journal. You sit up slowly, brushing crumbs off your cloak that may or may not have existed before you slept. There's moss in your sleeve and the faint impression of a leaf pressed into your cheek. You stretch. Your bones sigh. Then, as always, your hand goes to your pocket. Lavender, poppy seed, coated, tart, half cookie original. Each one still with you, present, steady. Carried across another night, another handful of thoughts, another layer of meaning that no historian could ever fully catalog. You begin walking again. The trees thin. The sky is pale with the promise of breakfast. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings soft like someone dropped a spoon in a holy bowl. You reach a river by mid-morning. The bridge is ancient stone, moss-covered, and shaped like someone once tried to build a rainbow using anxiety and good intentions. But it holds. Pilgrims cluster at the foot of the bridge, waiting their turn. You overhear hushed conversation. Is it still there? Did anyone find it? They say it crumbled last spring. Curious, you edge forward. At the center of the bridge is a small niche in the stonework, just large enough to hold something biscuit-sized. People are peering in. Some bow slightly, others whisper. You wait your turn, step forward, and there it is. A cookie, round, cracked, covered in wax. A tiny sign beside it reads, "The last offering of the crumb duel." You blink. You've heard whispers of this. A tale so ridiculous it must have some truth in it. 2 pilgrims, 2 rival villages, 1 festival. A disagreement over which town made the better cookie. The argument escalated. Recipes were guarded. Flour was thrown. And finally a duel was declared, not with swords but with biscuits. Each pilgrim baked 1 cookie. They were placed side by side on this bridge. Passers-by were to vote by leaving crumbs or tokens. But then a storm came, washed the votes away. Both pilgrims agreed to seal their cookies in wax and leave them as eternal witnesses to unresolved judgment. One was later eaten by a curious fox. The other remains. And that leads us to tonight's historical fact. While no official duels over cookies are recorded in medieval law, sadly there are documented cases of villages competing during feast days by presenting symbolic baked goods, often judged by monks or local lords. In some regions, the winning pastry became part of a procession, or its recipe was ceremonially shared for the year. Shared is in quotation marks because most bakers accidentally left out one critical ingredient when handing over their recipe. You leave a crumb from your tart on the stone. It feels like the right thing to do. You don't stay long, just enough to acknowledge that even cookies can carry grudges. On the other side of the bridge, the path forks. One leads uphill toward a weathered chapel with wind-battered shutters. The other dives into a forest where the light goes green and everything smells like damp bread. You follow the forest, and as you walk, you begin to notice the trees are marked. Not with carvings, but with tied bits of cloth ribbons, torn kerchiefs, bits of linen. Each one knotted around a low branch or bush. Some have symbols drawn in ash or dye. Some have cookie crumbs embedded in the folds. You pause at one particularly elaborate ribbon. It holds a tiny wax-wrapped object tied like a talisman. You gently unwrap it. Inside is a square biscuit, dense and dark. On its surface, a single word scratched in crude script. Sorry. You wrap it back, tie it in place, but step back. Because now you know you've stumbled into a forest of edible confessions. And that brings us to tonight's quirky detail. In parts of medieval Ireland and Scotland, travelers would tie bits of cloth or food wrappers to sacred trees, often near wells or crossroads. These rag trees or wish trees served as vessels for prayers, regrets, and apologies. Occasionally, dried breads or biscuits were included, wrapped in wax marked with initials or shared recipes as acts of emotional release. Some historians dismiss it as folklore. Others consider it a quiet form of lay ritual, a way to confess when no priest was near or no words felt right. You walk carefully now, respectfully. Every ribbon tells a story, every knot a moment someone chose to carry and then let go. You pass dozens, some old, some clearly new, one still warm. Eventually the ribbons thin, the light returns. And there at the edge of the forest sits a small wooden bench carved with the words, "Let go what you've already carried far enough." You sit, you think, then slowly you reach into your pocket and take out the coated cookie. You've carried it long, wondered, protected it, admired its strange spiral script. But now maybe it belongs to someone else's questions. You place it gently on the bench, no fanfare, just a breath. And then you take out a crumb from your lavender biscuit and press it into the groove of the wood. Not a goodbye, just a punctuation mark. You rise, your pockets are lighter by one. Your heart oddly isn't. And here comes tonight's open scholarly question. Is the emotional weight we assign to objects like these cookies a modern projection? Or were medieval pilgrims equally invested in the symbolic resonance of the ordinary? Can a biscuit be sacred if someone believes it is? You walk into the soft light of late afternoon. The air smells of rosemary and pine. You hear bees somewhere nearby humming like they've memorized the songs from last night's cookie circle. And ahead, just barely visible through the trees, you see it. A stone marker with an engraving of a hand holding a loaf. You smile, because wherever you're going next, it probably comes with bread. The stone marker greets you like a quiet joke left behind by someone with flour on their hands and too much time on their feet. A hand holding a loaf. Not triumphant, not holy, just offering or maybe asking. It's hard to tell. You trace the carving with your finger and some part of you expects it to be warm. It isn't, but the moss around the base is. That's something. The path ahead begins to descend into a shallow valley with rows of low stone walls, crisscrossing the land like someone tried to quilt the earth with rocks and sheep fences. You step carefully. These are the kind of stones that twist ankles and test patience. And then you hear it. Singing, off-key, passionate, and very, very food-related. You round a bend and come upon what can only be described as a pilgrim kitchen accident in progress. A group of travelers stands around a fire pit. Smoke curls upward in elegant spirals while a large pot bubbles ominously. Several people are holding sticks with dough on the ends. One person is wearing a cloak covered entirely in what looks like toasted breadcrumbs. You've found them, the crumb duelers, or at least some distant spiritual descendants. Ah, someone calls. A new voice, come judge. You blink. Sorry. We're holding a bake-off, another explains, brandishing a lumpy cake on a tile. And we need an impartial taster. You look impartial and hungry. You are in fact both. You accept the offer and are handed a pilgrim risole, which turns out to be mashed chickpeas, parsley, and dried fruit wrapped in dough and slightly burned on one end. You take a bite. It's edible. You nod respectfully. Another pilgrim offers you a honeycomb patty shaped like a star dusted with crushed mint. It smells better than it looks and tastes exactly like a memory you can't place. You chew slowly, everyone watching. Then you declare diplomatically they're both confusing and beautiful in their own way. A cheer erupts. Someone pats you on the back. Another presses a cookie metal into your palm, a small wafer with a smiling face stamped into it. You laugh. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. During medieval pilgrimages, especially at major resting spots or feast days, communities along the route sometimes held kitchen contests among travelers. These events allowed pilgrims to showcase recipes, use local ingredients, and form bonds through friendly rivalry. Prizes included tokens, blessing charms, or simply having your dish recorded in a local kitchen book. Yes, kitchen books, handwritten collections of recipes and comments that were passed down like edible folklore. You sit by the fire and watch as someone attempts to cook flatbread on a polished shield. It goes poorly. Everyone applauds anyway. This is not the spiritual solemnity of a holy journey. This is the other side of pilgrimage, the laughter, the mess, the shared absurdity of wandering for weeks with only biscuits and blisters for company. Someone nudges you and offers a pouch. Trade, they ask. You've got the look of someone with interesting crumbs. You grin and pull out the poppy seed bar. It's been with you since the inn. Wrapped carefully. You offer it. In return, they give you a triangle-shaped biscuit filled with dark jam and crusted with what might be sea salt or pilgrim tears. Family recipe, they whisper. Supposedly brings luck or indigestion, depending on your sins. You nod solemnly. Into the archive it goes. And now your left pocket is starting to outweigh your right. Balance must be maintained. You offer your lavender biscuit, the one gifted at the shrine, to the group at large. A woman with a braid down to her belt accepts it reverently. This smells like memory. It's hard not to feel proud. Later that evening, as the fire turns to embers and stories give way to quiet chewing, someone asks, "What's the best cookie you've ever tasted?" Silence. One by one, people begin to answer, slowly, thoughtfully. Not with grand desserts or noble pastries, but with small, humble things. The one my sister dropped in the river and I ate anyway. A stale oatcake that saved my life during a flood. The shortbread someone left on my windowsill when my dog died. You think for a long moment, then you say I'm still carrying it. And that brings us to tonight's quirky detail. In medieval culinary records, cookies and small cakes often had names that reflected events, emotions, or places. Widow's wafers, thistle discs, joy pies, and even oops bread. Food was memory, not just sustenance baked into form spiced with story. So maybe the best cookie isn't the one you've eaten. Maybe it's the one you've remembered, or shared, or still carry in your pocket waiting for the right moment. The group begins to fade into sleep, some lying on cloaks, others curling near stones. One person inexplicably using a loaf of rye as a pillow. You lie back, the cookie metal still warm in your hand. And here's tonight's open scholarly question. Should we treat shared culinary memory, particularly among pilgrims, as a legitimate form of historical record? Is the retelling of who gave what to whom and why any less valid than names in parchment or deeds in ink? You watch the stars blink into place above the valley. One by one, lights go out. Not just the fire, but the chatter, the motion, the weight of needing to know everything. Tonight you don't. Tonight it's enough to know your cookies are safe. And someone out there is still singing about chickpea rissoles. Morning arrives slowly, as if the sun too has been walking for days and needs a moment to stretch. You sit up with cookie metal still clutched in one hand, and a blade of grass mysteriously threaded through your sleeve. Around you, the makeshift camp begins to stir, pilgrims' yawning cloaks being folded, someone brushing their teeth with what appears to be a pine twig, and misplaced confidence. There's warmth in your chest that isn't from sleep or the fire or the absurdly minty rissole you regret trying at midnight. It's from the quiet realization you've stopped counting the days. You're not sure when it happened. Somewhere between the lavender cookie and the triangle jam biscuit, the idea of how far or how long became less important than who you've met and what you've carried. You rise, stretch, and do the now familiar pat down. Buzz, paquets. Original cookie half slightly cracked. Heart-shaped crumb gift, mostly dream memory, sea salt jam triangle cookie metal smiling face. You're starting to resemble a walking pastry tray. And somehow that feels right. You say quiet goodbyes to the camp, accept a small crumb from someone who once swore they'd never share, and head out down the road. The trail today is different, more rural. Fewer markers, fewer pilgrims. Just hedgerows wind and the occasional goat that looks like it has opinions. You pass a crooked fence with a sign that says, "No pilgrim shortcuts, respect the doe." You take the long way respectfully. Around midday, you reach a small clearing where a group of older women are seated on blankets. Heads bowed, fingers working delicately over parchment and cloth. As you get closer, you realize they're embroidering recipes. Yes, actual recipes in thread. One of them looks up. You've got the look of someone who carries cookies with emotional baggage. You blink, then nod slowly. Shades. She gestures for you to sit. "We're the Order of the Pocket Apron," she says. "We collect, translate, and preserve lost baking wisdom, and occasionally gossip about monks." You glance around. Some of the others are quietly arguing over whether half a pinch was meant literally or spiritually. They offer you a small biscuit wrapped in red thread. You give them your smiling cookie medal in exchange. One woman immediately pins it to her shawl and says, "This one's clearly blessed." You're not sure if she means by heaven or yeast. They let you watch as they stitch recipes passed down verbally across generations. One pattern is shaped like a spiral. When you trace it with your eyes, it spells out a cinnamon and honey flatbread that was supposedly only baked under full moons. Which brings us to tonight's historical fact. Some medieval culinary knowledge, especially among women in remote communities, was preserved not through books, but through craft recipes encoded in embroidery woven patterns or carved into bread stamps. These methods allowed recipes to survive in times and places where literacy, secrecy, or gender restrictions made traditional record-keeping difficult. You imagine someone long ago stitching a recipe into a shawl, not for glory, but for memory. Not to impress, but to preserve flavor as language. You ask if you can try embroidering a crumb code of your own. They laugh kindly and hand you a needle. You stab yourself twice. They offer a biscuit as compensation. Eventually, the group stands. We go where the next whisper leads, one explains, and right now it smells like nutmeg. You wave farewell and tuck your new red thread wrapped biscuit into the growing cookie reliquary you call a pocket. As you continue walking, the path grows quiet again. Birds chirp, leaves shuffle above. You spot what looks like a scarecrow in the distance, only when you get closer you realize it's a pilgrim effigy. Straw-stuffed, cloaked. In one hand, a wooden staff. In the other, yes, a crumbling biscuit nailed to the palm. There's a plaque beneath it. To the pilgrim who never returned, may your path be sweet. Someone's left a small collection of offerings, raisins, a spoon, a note scrawled on a torn bit of parchment that reads, "You were right about the walnuts." You don't know who they were or what happened, but you pause. You reach into your pocket and leave the tiniest corner of your red thread biscuit. Not for superstition, not for ceremony, just for kindness. And now for tonight's quirky detail. Pilgrim shrines and waymarkers sometimes included effigies or carved figures to honor those who were lost along the way. Offerings left at these sites ranged from coins and rosaries to baked goods, often personalized. Some even became part of local lore, like the Lady of the Crumbled Crust in Brittany, said to grant clarity to those who'd lost their way. You wonder how many forgotten travelers are remembered only through soft bread and a whispered joke. Later that day, the landscape opens into a small farming village, cheerful in the way only places with 4 ovens per street can be. You follow the scent of baking to a communal courtyard where a group of people are hosting what appears to be a public bake swap. No signs, no rules. Just a long table, an empty ledger, and a basket of chalk for writing what you took or left. You pull out the sea salt jam triangle, place it carefully beside a rose-shaped tart. Someone watches and smiles. You don't say a word. You don't have to. You take a small, soft cake in return. Round, cracked, smells like cardamom and roasted memory. You bite. It's warm. And tonight's open scholarly question: can memory baked into food be shared by strangers? If recipes, shapes, and flavors act as emotional signatures, then is a cookie once carried by one person somehow different when passed to another? What exactly makes edible memory transferable? As twilight slips in like a cat with cold paws, you settle on a bench beneath a fig tree. You don't check your cookie archive. You know it's full again, but you feel somehow a little more emptied of burden. As if every bite, every trade, every whisper of flour and spice is shaping not just your path, but yourself. The journey continues, and so do the crumbs. You sleep beneath the fig tree, and the wind rocks you gently like a story being retold by someone with flour on their apron and too much love in their voice. At some point during the night, something small and warm curls against your foot, perhaps a cat, perhaps a dream. When you wake, it's gone, but there's a fig leaf folded neatly beside you and a single almond placed on top like a signature. You take it as a blessing, or a well-meaning prank. Either way, it's breakfast. You rise, brush leaf crumbs from your tunic, and begin walking again. The path curves along the edge of a vineyard where tiny grapes look like they've only recently remembered they're supposed to be juicy someday. The sun is mild. The clouds are polite. Even the wind hums at a considerate volume. You check your pockets. Half-cookie original red thread biscuit, cardamom memory cake, heart-shaped crumb gift, only dream crumbs left. The cookie metal is gone. You suspect the embroidery ladies embroidered it into the sky. Further down the road, you pass a small stone house with smoke trailing from its chimney and a sign carved above the lintel. The Chapel of Crumbs and Spoons. Naturally, you stop. The interior smells like roasted barley and aged honey. Rows of mismatched wooden chairs face a long table, not an altar, and on that table rests a sprawling collection of spoons. Some carved, some bent, one clearly whittled from a flute. Beneath them lies a woven cloth stitched with phrases like stir gently and forgive like flour. An old woman in a flour-dusted habit greets you. Pilgrim, she asks. You nod. Cookie bearer. You pause, then slowly tap your pocket. She smiles. You're welcome then. She invites you to sit and share in the ritual of the spoon, which turns out to be less intimidating than it sounds and more delicious than it should be. Everyone present holds a spoon and a single bite of someone else's baked good. There are no names, no exchanges, just the quiet act of tasting what another once carried. You receive a sliver of bread baked with onion and pear. It makes you think of autumn, of roads not taken, and of someone humming while chopping fruit. You offer a thin slice of your cardamom memory cake. Someone across the table closes their eyes when they eat it. No one claps, no one critiques. They just eat and nod, which brings us to tonight's historical fact. In some medieval monastic communities, especially among mendicant or semi-nomadic orders, there existed a practice known informally as spoon exchange. Travelers or pilgrims would offer a bite of their provisions, often in silence, as a gesture of humility and shared mortality. The spoon itself became a symbol of passage hospitality and gentle presence. You're offered a spoon on your way out, not to keep just to hold for a while. It's wooden, slightly scorched. The handle is carved with a spiral pattern not unlike the coated cookie you once carried. You tuck it into your belt. Outside, the path splits again. You follow the one that smells faintly of fennel and cautious optimism. By afternoon, you reach a wide meadow scattered with stones arranged in loose spirals. Someone has laid linen runners between the circles, and pilgrims walk slowly along them, murmuring softly. It takes a moment to realize you're watching a walking recipe ritual. Each linen path is embroidered with steps in faded ink or colored thread. Knead gently with both hands. Pause and listen for the dough. Bake when the sun first touches the gate. You step into one and follow the winding trail, reading with your feet. The instructions grow stranger, more poetic. Fold with forgiveness. Whisper to the crust. Serve before you forget why you made it. At the center of the spiral stands a small oven, yes, a real one, cracked but still warm. Someone's left behind a half-eaten barley scone with a bite missing that looks almost reverent. You sit beside it, wrap your hands around your knees, and listen to the oven breathe. It doesn't speak, not exactly, but you understand. And now for tonight's quirky detail. While no definitive records confirm the practice, several 15th century pilgrim diaries from the Iberian Peninsula reference bread paths or recipe walks in which community members embroidered family baking instructions onto long bolts of fabric. These were unrolled in fields or courtyards during religious festivals and followed like labyrinths, blending culinary tradition with meditative movement. You leave behind a piece of your red thread biscuit tucked carefully under a corner of the fabric. You hope someone else steps on it gently and thinks of something kind. The sun begins to set behind a row of chestnut trees. Shadows stretch like lazy cats across the path. You find a stone wall to rest against and unwrap what remains of your half-original cookie. It's smaller now, weathered. A little sticky on one edge. You bite. It's dry. Tastes like clove travel and something that might be love. Or time. Hard to say. You hold it in your palm and think about every place it's been. Every moment you chose not to eat it. Every pocket it has slept in. And now comes tonight's open scholarly question. If we follow a cookie through time, not just its recipe, but its journey, its trades, its places of rest, can it be considered a narrative object? And if so, does eating it mark the end of its story? Or the beginning of yours? You wrap what's left in a piece of soft cloth, not to save it, not quite. Just to honor the companionship of crumbs. The stars arrive without fanfare. The wind smells like flour and firewood. And as you fall asleep beneath the chestnut trees, you feel not full exactly, but fed. You wake slowly as if even your dreams are reluctant to leave. Chestnut leaves rustle above your head in the soft, rhythmic way only trees who've seen centuries of wandering can manage. The morning light is filtered and calm, gold-spilled and unhurried. It dapples your cloak like someone has gently pressed a sieve of sunlight over your body. You stretch and sit up. Your hand drifts to your pocket where your archive lives. Half original cookie now, quarter cookie, red thread biscuit, shared cardamom, memory cake, long gone. Sea salt jam triangle spoon from the chapel of crumbs. A sliver of quiet. You smile. You can feel the weight shifting, not just in your pockets, but in you. This pilgrimage began with a cookie and a reason. You can't quite remember the reason anymore. But the cookie has evolved. You follow a sloping path through thin woods. Each footstep presses softly into the earth as if it's trying not to wake it. Around mid-morning, you reach a peculiar structure tucked into a thicket of elderberry bushes. It's shaped like a beehive made of stone and mud with tiny windows in the shape of loaves. A sign beside the arched entrance reads, "Museum of Forgotten Breads curated daily." You hesitate. But you are nothing if not obedient to the call of obscure carbohydrate anthropology. You duck inside. The room is cool and dimly lit. Shelves made of stacked slate line the curved walls, and each shelf holds a single bread labeled in a variety of languages. Some loaves are fossilized. Some are wrapped in fabric. One is clearly a rock pretending to be a scone. A curator appears silent as butter melting on a hot pan. She gestures with 2 fingers toward a placard. "Please do not taste the exhibits." You nod solemnly, resisting a very strong urge to nibble a loaf that looks suspiciously like a cinnamon snail. She leads you deeper into a chamber marked "Experimental Rounds and Dough Mysticism." The air smells of old rye and possibly regret. She points out a small glass box holding a biscuit stamped with the sun, a moon, and what might be a fish doing taxes. You ask what it means. She replies softly, "We don't know, but everyone who sees it feels something slightly nostalgic. You do. It reminds you of, well, something. Or maybe someone. Someone who once baked you a cookie that looked a little odd, tasted slightly strange, and left a permanent dent in your idea of love. You donate a sliver of your jam triangle biscuit to the exhibit. She accepts it with a pair of tongs made of wishful thinking and walnut wood. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. Some medieval communities maintained collections of preserved sacred doughs often kept in cold cellars or monasteries. These included failed communion loaves, festival breads that were never eaten, or symbolic pastries baked during eclipses, births, or near-death recoveries. Though not museums in the modern sense, these spaces acted as cultural memory vaults where food was not consumed but remembered. You exit the museum blinking into the light, wondering if someone someday will catalog your crumbs. At a nearby stream, you find a stone basin filled with rose water and lemon leaves. It's labeled Pilgrim Palate Reset. You rinse your hands. Your tongue feels curious again. The next village on your route is quiet, tidy, suspiciously perfect. Bunting hangs across the lanes. Tables are being set up in the square. Children run past carrying baskets of something round and sweet-smelling. A baker, flour-dusted and smiling like he's heard every secret in town, waves you over. "Welcome to the Day of Dough," he says. Everyone shares a recipe. Everyone tastes something new. No one leaves hungry or unbaked. You ask if pilgrims are allowed to participate. He looks at you, dusty, travel-worn, and cookie-scented, and grins. "Friend," he says, "you're the main event." He hands you a small apron embroidered with a loaf and a heart. You've done it with reverence. You're assigned a table near the fountain where ingredients are laid out in tiny clay bowls. Barley flour, lavender buds, soft goat cheese, wild honey, and something that looks like powdered fennel but could also be crushed optimism. You begin to mix. You don't follow a recipe. You follow instinct, crumbs of memory, gestures half remembered from travelers now behind you. Your dough is uneven, sticky, lopsided, but it smells like everything you've carried. You shape it into a spiral. Not perfect, not elegant, but true. A child brings it to the communal oven in a basket. It vanishes into the heat. While you wait, you taste other people's offerings. a triangular pastry filled with roasted carrot and orange zest, a flatbread inscribed with lines of a lullaby, a crunchy biscuit that makes you remember the color blue. And then yours returns, slightly overbaked on one edge, a crack along the side, still warm. You break it into pieces and place it on a wooden tray. People try it. They nod. One person tears up. Another laughs. A stranger takes a second piece and says, "This tastes like someone finally said what I was thinking." You wrap the last piece in cloth. You know who it's for. And now for tonight's quirky detail. In some parts of rural Spain and southern France, there were annual village rituals known as bread-telling days, where community members baked symbolic loaves or cookies meant to express feelings, confessions, or apologies. These edible expressions were anonymously shared, and the community would taste and interpret them aloud like fortune cookies, but more honest and less crunchy. Before you leave the village, someone hands you a token, a small, soft biscuit pressed into the shape of a closed eye. Dream well, they say, and let the flour carry what you can't. You carry it carefully in your palm as you return to the road pockets, once again rearranged. Quarter cookie original Dream Eye biscuit spoon from the Chapel of Crumbs. Your own creation, spiral split wrapped. And now for tonight's open scholarly question. Should culinary artifacts created spontaneously like your spiral loaf be considered part of personal historical record? If food tells a story is the act of baking a form of authorship and eating a kind of reading, the wind shifts slightly. You walk on. And in your pocket, the story, crumb by crumb, keeps writing itself. You walk into dusk carrying a biscuit shaped like a closed eye. It rests gently in your palm light as a whisper, dense as a secret. You haven't tasted it. Not yet. Some things ask to be held a little longer before they're understood. The air smells of sweet hay, river stone, and faint lavender left behind by a day that tried its best. Each step presses your boot into the cooling earth, softening the road behind you like memory softened by time. Your pockets are full again, softly cluttered with stories in edible form. Quarter cookie original spiral loaf wrapped and imperfect. Wooden spoon mildly sacred. Dream Eye biscuit, a growing feeling of quiet completeness. You round a bend and find a wooden gate standing open to a wide-walled garden. There's no sign, no greeting, just a long table set under fig trees, gently flickering lanterns strung overhead, and seats empty, expectant, waiting. Someone has baked this evening on purpose. You step inside. At the far end of the table stands a man in a soft brown cloak dusted with flour and pollen. His beard is a story unto itself. He smiles and gestures for you to sit. You do. He says nothing, just places in front of you a small clay plate and a knife carved from pear wood. Beside it, a single biscuit, flat, round, simple, cracked down the middle like it's just survived something emotional. He nods, you nod, and then you eat. It tastes like old bread shared on a cold day, like borrowed joy, like someone else's best attempt offered without fear. Not delicious, but deeply kind. He says finally, we call those settling biscuits. They aren't meant to impress, they're meant to finish something. You blink. He adds, you've been carrying a lot. Thought you might need a pause. You nod again, throat tight. You offer him your spiral loaf. He accepts it with both hands, the way one holds something that might sing. It's not perfect, you say. Neither is the road, he replies. Which brings us to tonight's historical fact. In some monastic and lay communities, there existed a tradition of closing loaves or bread of silence baked to mark the end of a journey, a vow, or even a period of mourning. They were plain by design, sometimes intentionally flawed as a way of acknowledging imperfection as part of holiness. You sit in the garden longer than you mean to. More pilgrims arrive slowly, quietly. Some alone, some in pairs. No one speaks loudly. The table stretches like it's always had enough space. You're handed a soft roll filled with pear and sage. You eat it in 3 grateful bites. Someone offers you a honey crust dipped in rose water. You trade a bite of your Dream Eye biscuit in return. A woman across the table stands and begins to hum. Not a song you know, but something round and gentle like a lullaby baked for a loaf that never rose. Others join not in unison but in harmony. Crumbs and chorus. It is not a performance, it is a presence. When the meal ends, there is no applause, just a quiet scraping of chairs, a gentle clinking of spoons, and the soft rustle of people who know what it means to carry stories in flour. You thank the man in the cloak. He hands you a folded napkin. Inside is a square cookie with one corner missing. This is for the next fork in the road, he says. Eat it or don't, but hold it when you're unsure. You nod, tuck it gently beside your dream eye. You leave the garden not full but fed. The road that follows is narrow and lined with hedges. Fireflies appear, small lights that drift like loose thoughts. You walk slower now, like your body knows the story is nearing its last chapters. And now for tonight's quirky detail. In certain medieval customs, particularly in southern Italy and central France, shared bread circles, gatherings of silent communal meals were used as a form of closure. Not celebration, not mourning, just closure. The act of eating together quietly marked a transition. The meal itself was the ritual. At the end of the hedged path, you see a crossroads. There's no sign, just a low stone and a wooden post carved with a spiral and a circle. You recognize both, symbols you've seen in thread and dough and dreams. You sit on the stone and unwrap the square cookie. The missing corner makes it easier to hold. You close your eyes. You breathe. You bite. It's dry, a little chewy, faintly sweet. The kind of sweetness that arrives late and doesn't apologize. And here comes tonight's open scholarly question. When we bake something and give it away, not for money or pride or tradition, but just for connection, are we participating in an ancient ritual older than language? Is a shared cookie made with intention, an artifact of silent theology? You lie down near the post and rest your head on your cloak. You no longer check your pockets every hour. You no longer wonder if the journey is right, because the road is still under your feet. And your crumbs scattered, eaten, traded, tucked into trees have become part of the landscape. The story continues, but not tonight. Tonight you sleep like someone who's been gently folded into the dough of the world. Morning arrives with fog that doesn't ask for permission. It rolls in gently, folding itself around trees and boots and cloaks, softening everything it touches. You wake on the edge of the crossroads, your head still resting on your bundled cloak, your breath mixing with the mist, as if you're exhaling a dream you hadn't meant to keep. Your pockets are still full, but you don't check them anymore. You know. The contents have become more than ingredients. They are familiar weights balanced like internal compass points. Each cookie, each crumb is shifted from object to orientation. You rise slowly. The world is hushed, as if holding its breath, waiting to see which road you'll choose. You pick the path to the right, not because it looks easier or clearer, but because your feet turn that way without consulting your thoughts. The fog parts just a little. An hour later, you arrive at something strange. A single wooden door standing upright in a field completely unattached to any building. There's a small bench beside it and a sign above that reads, "Pilgrim Pause Station, please close the door behind you emotionally too." You sit. The wind lifts the door slightly on its hinges. It creaks like an old man telling a bedtime story he's already forgotten the ending to. You open the door. Nothing happens. You walk through it. Still nothing. You turn around. Now there's a table. It wasn't there before. On the table, a teacup, a folded napkin, a note that reads, "Time to tell your cookie story." You blink, look around. The field is still empty. The fog watches patiently. You sit at the table. You unfold the napkin. Inside is a small square notebook. On the cover, a pressed crumb. You open it. The pages are blank, except the last one, in soft slanted handwriting. Your crumbs are safe here. Start wherever you like. You stare at the page. You reach into your pocket. Slowly, gently, you place on the table the final fragment of the original cookie. The Dream Eye biscuit slightly crumbled, the spiral loaf half wrapped in linen, the spoon burnished now with the oil of your own fingers. And finally, the cookie you received from the garden table, the one with a missing corner. You arrange them without plan or perfection, just instinct, and you begin to write. Not a history, not a confession, just what you remember. The smell of barley and mint near the forked trail, the laughter of pilgrims singing about lentils, the quiet touch of a cookie passed hand to hand in silence, the half biscuit that witnessed your turning point, the moment you traded your story for a sliver of someone else's and didn't want it back. As you write, something odd happens. The cookies seem to change not visibly but weight-wise. Lighter, like they've exhaled something they were holding for you. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. Some medieval pilgrim hostels kept memory books or crumb ledgers where travelers were invited to write a short note confession or recipe. While many were eventually lost or repurposed, some fragmentary pages remain containing drawings of biscuits, prayers shaped like instructions, and even imagined ingredients like laughter ground fine. The door creaks again. You look up. The table is gone. In its place, a flat stone warm to the touch. On it carved in curling letters. If you've written your cookie story, you're already where you were going. You smile. You walk on. The path turns narrow again. Less traveled. Just you, a chorus of birds arguing about worms, and the soft jingle of your spoon tapping against your belt. By afternoon, you reach a stone cottage surrounded by bees. Not metaphorically, actual bees. You pause. The sign reads, Honeybread Monastery, pilgrims welcome if polite to insects. You bow slightly just in case. Inside, the air is thick with sweetness. Not cloying, just generous. You're greeted by a monk who smells of lavender and looks like he hasn't sat down since the Crusades. He hands you a warm towel and a cup of something golden. You sip. It tastes like sunrises and patience. He gestures for you to follow. You're led into a large hall where honey cakes rest on wooden racks, each in a different shape. Some are stamped, some braided, some shaped like birds. One shaped like a chair, possibly symbolic, possibly not. He offers you one with 6 corners. Each angle, he says, represents a truth. You ask what they are. He shrugs, that's your part. You take a bite, soft, fragrant, a hint of time and memory. And here's tonight's quirky detail. Honey cakes, particularly those baked by religious communities, were often used in rituals of reflection. Shapes carried meaning, circles for cycles, braids for connection, triangles for decision. While records are inconsistent, some suggest that pilgrims were offered honey cakes to mark the end of a chapter in their journey, edible punctuation. After tea and honey, the monk returns with something unexpected, a wooden box, hand-carved, no lock. Inside, dozens of crumbs, each labeled, each accompanied by a scrap of parchment or cloth. One reads, from a cookie traded during a storm, saved my ankle. Another crust from the forgiveness loaf, bit tough but honest. You are invited to leave one. You hesitate. Then you place the last speck of your original cookie, barely more than a grain, inside the box. You leave no note, just a glance, a nod, a breath. The monk bows. You bow back. As you leave the monastery, you feel light again. Like something has been unshouldered, not cast off, but carefully transferred to something larger than yourself. And now comes tonight's open scholarly question. If memory can live inside a crumb and story inside a shape, do we need ink at all to be remembered? Is legacy measured not by monument or manuscript, but by what we were willing to share and leave behind? The sun lowers itself into the hills like dough settling into a pan. You follow the path slow and certain, and in your pocket only one cookie remains, the dream eyes slightly crumbled, slightly dreaming still. The road is different now. Not in shape or slope, it still winds, gently lined with hedgerows and old stones, but in feeling. The way a room changes once you've said what needed saying. The way bread settles when it's finally left the oven. You walk quietly, not because the path demands silence, but because you have no need to fill it anymore. The words, the songs, the crumbs, they've all been left where they were needed. And in your pocket, the final biscuit remains. The dream eye. It's lighter now, cracked along the edge. You've carried it carefully but not perfectly. There's flour dust on your sleeve and honey under your fingernails. You're not clean. You're not polished. You're ready. The landscape widens ahead into a high plain where the grass moves like breath and the wind sounds like someone flipping soft pages. On the horizon you see it, a stone arch, tall old freestanding, weathered by centuries of not needing to be anywhere but here. You approach. There's no plaque, no gatekeeper, just a smooth stone slab beside it with these words. This is the place where the crumbs end, or where they begin again. No wrong answer. You sit, not because you're tired, but because this feels like a moment meant for stillness. You reach into your pocket. The Dream Eye cookie rests in your palm. You remember where you got it. The quiet village, the gift at the bake swap, the person who said dream well and let the flour carry what you can't. You hold the cookie for a while, then you bite. It doesn't crumble. It melts, and for a moment you're back in every place you've ever tasted something shared. The monastery garden table. The woman in the blue shawl singing over heart-shaped cookies. The embroidered recipe paths in the field. The bridge where Crumbcoat John left his last crumb. The child who traded mint for memory. The woman who whispered to her dough and baked it into forgiveness. They're not places anymore. They're part of you. Flavors. Fragments. Folded gently into the layers of your own crust. And here comes your final historical fact. In certain pilgrimage traditions, particularly among Breton and Galician communities, the last morsel of bread or cookie carried by a traveler was not eaten until the end of the journey, and even then it was consumed only at a place of reflection. This act was considered both a release and a return, a way to let go of the road while honoring all it gave. You place the final crumb of the Dream Eye in your mouth. It tastes like closure, and just faintly like beginning. You rise. You pass through the arch. On the other side, there is no fanfare, no burst of music, just a path slightly narrower lined with unfamiliar flowers. You realize something quietly wonderful. You don't need to know where this path goes, because you trust yourself now. And that brings us to tonight's final quirky detail. In rare illuminated manuscripts, there are margins decorated not with saints or beasts, but with loaves, crumbs, and cookies. Some scholars believe these illustrations were added by scribes who'd once been pilgrims who wanted to leave behind not doctrine but memory. Proof, perhaps, that the sacred can be silly, or that the silly too can be sacred. You walk on. The wind hums in a key you now recognize. The ground gives a little underfoot soft with dust and story. Somewhere nearby, someone is baking something you'll never taste, but the smell still comforts you. And here it is, your final open scholarly question. If food is memory, and memory is story, and story is what we leave behind, then could the quietest legacy be a single uneaten cookie in the pocket of someone who walked a little slower, listened a little longer, and shared without needing to explain? You take a deep breath. There's nothing in your hands now, and somehow that feels like the right way to end a journey made entirely of carrying. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. You thought it ended at the arch. It felt like an ending. You ate the final crumb. You passed through. The path behind you softened into memory. The wind seemed to say well done in the language of rustling leaves and fading footsteps. But here you are, still walking, still listening, still curious. Because what they don't tell you, what no shrine, no monk, no embroidered recipe scroll explains, is that sometimes the end of one story is the moment another begins. Not louder, not bigger, just quieter, more folded inward. And so the road continues. This new path is narrower, worn less by pilgrimage than by patience. The flowers here don't bloom to be seen. They bloom like whispers. You pass purple thistles, tiny buttercup stars, and mushrooms that look like they once heard a very good joke and are still giggling about it underground. Your pockets. They're empty. For the first time in so long, there's no weight at your hips. No biscuit wrapped in linen, no crumbling offering in your palm. It does. You feel lighter, and also strangely itchy with possibility. An hour in, you find a bench carved into a fallen log, and on that bench a box. Not fancy, just pine wood, with a lid slightly ajar. Inside, seeds, hundreds of them, all different. A handwritten sign rests beneath the lid. Plant what you carried, trade what you tasted. You pause. You have nothing left to trade, except your memory. You reach into the folds of your tunic and pull out the spoon, the wooden one from the Chapel of Crumbs. You trace the spiral on its handle and think of the bread table, the quiet songs, the woman who laughed without making a sound. You place the spoon gently inside the box, tuck it among the seeds, and in return you take a small envelope marked with a single word. Coriander. It rustles with promise. You pocket it, not as food, not yet, as potential. Which brings us to tonight's historical fact. In some late medieval monastic gardens, pilgrims were invited to trade seeds for stories. A seed pouch might be exchanged for a tale of a healing, a vision, or even a recipe gone wildly wrong. These gardens served both as herbal repositories and as memory keepers, living libraries cultivated by crumbs and conversations. You keep walking. The sun shifts overhead, playing soft games with the shadows. Eventually, you come to a stream crossed by a plank bridge. Tied to the bridge railings are little cloth sachets, some embroidered, some simple, some clearly patched from bits of discarded cloaks. Inside them you peek. Crumbs. Tiny ones, old, perhaps ancient, protected like relics. There's a little sign etched in the wood. What isn't eaten may still nourish. What isn't remembered may still root. You tie your seed packet gently to the bridge, just for a moment. Let it breathe near the water. Let the river tell it a story. Then you take it back, pocket it once more. Your walk slows in the afternoon heat. The road leads uphill past terraces where olive trees lean toward each other like conspirators in a doughy parable. At the summit, a table. Yes, another table. Unattended, wide, worn smooth by time and elbows and the reverent weight of hands holding food. On it sits a book, hand-bound, stitched from old aprons and pressed with flour. The front reads, The Ongoing Crumb Record. You open to the most recent entry. In faded ink, traded one basil tart for a laugh. Worth it. Left behind a raisin, took a silence. Shared a burnt biscuit with a stranger, became friends. Still burned. You turn to a blank page. And now? Well, what will you write? You pause. Then carried nothing but stories. Gained weight in kindness. You sign it with your initials, but then scratch them out. Because what matters isn't your name. It's that you were here. And now comes tonight's quirky detail. A little-known 14th century practice in Catalonia involved travelers adding crumb-sized notations to pilgrim ledgers stored at crossroads inns. Instead of writing full names, they described the taste of their journey. One surviving page reads, Mine was chewy, uncertain, and improved with time. You close the book. Leave behind one of the coriander seeds just tucked between the last two pages. Someone will find it. And wonder. You walk on. The evening grows softer. The world tilts toward twilight. Your empty pockets sway, inviting new stories. And here's tonight's open scholarly question. When all that's left of a journey is the feeling it stirred, no maps, no tokens, just a flavor remembered in the back of the tongue. Can that be enough? Does memory require material, or can it live entirely in the hush between footsteps? You pass one last milestone for the day, a small child's drawing pinned to a tree. A stick figure pilgrim smiling, surrounded by circles labeled, cookie, other cookie. And this one was weird, but I liked it. You nod. That about sums it up. By now you walk like someone who trusts the road, not because it's straight. Not because it's easy, but because it's still there beneath your feet. Solid, slightly uneven, patient. The drawing from the tree still lingers in your mind, a pilgrim surrounded by labeled cookies. One simply noted, this one was weird, but I liked it. There's a kind of honesty there you've rarely seen in stained glass or illuminated margins. You're beginning to understand that the truest record of a journey is the one written in taste and texture. Today's road dips through a valley where the air smells faintly of rosemary and the past. There are fig trees with bark like dry laughter and bees that hum like they've memorized every lyric of a 13th century ballad and are just waiting for someone to ask. And for the first time in a long time, you feel hungry. Not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, crumbly. You reach a crossroads marked by a wooden statue of a very surprised-looking sheep. Its eyes are wide, its expression somewhere between awe and gastrointestinal confusion. A plaque below reads, "Here stood the bakery of loud miracles. All bread henceforth must be eaten respectfully." You blink. A short path off to the left leads to a stone ruin crumbling archways, half walls, and a brick oven so large you could nap inside it, which you suspect many have. Beside it stands a woman in a red scarf and flour-covered boots holding a very large mixing bowl and a very small spoon. She sees you, smiles, waves you over. "Welcome," she says. "You've come at the perfect time. We're baking argument bread today." You hesitate. "Is that good?" She laughs. "It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be honest." She gestures to a table where several others are kneading, shaping, and sometimes grumbling over their dough. One person mutters too much salt, like Gerald always said, while angrily punching a lump of rye. You're handed your own dough ball. "You've got to argue into it," she says. "Say the things you never said. Stir with truth. Season with relief." You blink. Then you begin. You knead slowly, murmuring all the things you left unsaid on old porches and quiet nights. You press into the dough memories you thought had cooled. You fold in a little guilt, a dash of awkward gratitude, and just a touch of cinnamon. The bread takes shape, lumpy, honest, slightly tilted to the left. You place it in the oven alongside the others. There's no timer, just intuition and air temperature and a faint sense of release. And that leads us to tonight's historical fact. In some isolated medieval communities, conflict breads were part of local reconciliation rituals. People involved in disputes would each bake a loaf representing their side, then trade slices during a communal meal. Eating each other's bread was a symbolic act of digestion, not just of food, but of disagreement. As your loaf bakes, the woman in red scarf offers you a sip of something warm. "Rosemary bitter tea," she explains. "It helps you keep what matters and let go of the rest." You drink. It tastes like mistakes made by people who tried. When your bread is done, you break it open. Steam rises. Inside swirls of time, traces of memory, and an accidental raisin you swear wasn't there earlier. You eat it slowly. Not because it's delicious, but because it's yours. Another baker, a quiet man with blue chalk on his sleeves, trades you a slice of his dense, savory, and oddly shaped like a question mark. You both nod. Nothing else is said. You leave the ruins just as the sun hits the edge of the oven door and makes it glow like an old secret. And now comes tonight's quirky detail. In a few rare manuscript marginalia from the 15th century, bakers were drawn not as chefs, but as mediators dressed in robes like priests holding loaves instead of scrolls. These illustrations suggest a kind of culinary diplomacy, bread as bridge cookies, as contract, and burnt crusts as cautionary tales. The road rises again gently. You follow. You find a shady grove by late afternoon where small bells hang from the trees, not for sound, but for weight, each one tied with a slip of paper. You read a few. "I said too much. I never said it. The dough forgave me. You tie your own. Mine rose anyway." A little breeze jingles at once, then carries on. As evening approaches, the path leads to a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcrop. A sign by the door reads, "One room, no bread, just rest." You step inside. There's a cot, a small lamp, a single drawer labeled for recipes you're not ready to write. You leave a note inside. Not a recipe. Just 3 words. Still becoming flavor. You lie down, listening to the mountain breathe. And here's tonight's open scholarly question. Can a cookie like a conversation change over time even before it's tasted? Is the act of baking as much about expectation as it is about outcome? And when we carry food that carries us, who is really feeding whom? Outside, a nightbird calls once, then silence. You close your eyes. Your stomach is full. Your pockets are light. Your story is not finished, but it's resting. Tonight, that's enough. You wake in the small cabin to the gentle sound of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that's been earned. The kind that arrives after the story pauses, not because it's over, but because it needs a breath. Outside, the mountain watches you wake, utterly unimpressed by your personal growth. You stretch slowly, body creaking like a floorboard in a bakery that's been stepped on for centuries. The drawer labeled for recipes you're not ready to write is still closed. You don't open it. You leave it there like an exhale you'll get to eventually. You step outside into the morning light and begin walking again. This path is narrower, still worn only by thoughtful shoes and hesitant decisions. Birds call to each other overhead in a language that might be gossip or philosophy. You decide not to interrupt. Your pockets are nearly empty. You carry only the coriander seed from the seed box, a spoon-shaped memory, and the flavor of what you've let go. And somewhere inside you an ache that isn't sadness, just space. The road bends into a forest of bent pines and crooked hazelnut trees. The branches are low, the air smells like fresh bark and stories no one got around to telling. And then you see them breadstones, flat, wide rocks lining the path, each carved with a faint image of a loaf or a biscuit, or on one particularly ambitious slab, a pretzel doing what appears to be a dramatic cartwheel. You pause at one stone where someone has carved. She left a cookie here. It never crumbled. You sit beside it, and you listen. There's no sound, just the sense that someone once stopped here and meant it. Which leads us to tonight's historical fact. Along lesser-known pilgrimage routes in parts of Eastern Europe, travelers carved bread marks into stone symbols of their passage, sometimes paired with dates or initials, but more often left anonymous. These marks acted as pause points, places for contemplation or edible offering where pilgrims might eat a crust, leave a crumb, or just rest beside their hunger. You keep walking. You pass more stones, some with lines like poetry, some with bite marks, one with the faint outline of a teacup. And then, unexpectedly, the trees fall away and the path opens into a clearing. At the center, a circular oven blackened with age, surrounded by benches. On one sits an old woman wearing a shawl stitched with dozens of tiny bread shapes, some familiar, some mythical, some shaped like punctuation marks. She sees you and pats the bench beside her. You've carried long enough, she says. It's time to bake something new. You don't protest. She hands you a bowl and a handful of ingredients you don't recognize. Not because they're foreign, because they feel like they haven't happened yet. You begin mixing. The dough is soft and strange. It smells like wet pages, forgotten birthdays, and coriander. You shape it without knowing what it's supposed to be. You press into it not just your hands, but all the things you haven't yet turned into words. She takes the dough, places it in the oven. Says nothing, and so you wait. While it bakes, she offers you tea that tastes like closure with a dash of clove. She tells you stories you don't remember asking for. About a boy who carried a stone wrapped in bread and told people it was a fruit. About a woman who only baked at night so the stars could correct her. About a cookie that forgave someone before they even ate it. You nod, you sip, you understand somehow. And here's tonight's quirky detail. In certain oral traditions, particularly in the Balkans, old women known as dough mothers were said to help pilgrims bake their final bread not for eating but for planting. These loaves were buried beneath trees or beside stones, symbolic acts of return. It was said that something from the journey would root and remain even after the traveler had moved on. Your bread finishes baking. It's odd. A little lopsided, slightly cracked but warm, sincere. She wraps it in linen and hands it to you. Don't eat it, she says. You don't ask why. You tuck it into your satchel like a letter you haven't read yet. You ask if you should leave anything in return. She smiles, reaches into her shawl, pulls out a crumb. I'm already full, she says. But carry this. It's from a loaf I once made when I didn't know who I was becoming. You place it in your empty pocket. And now comes tonight's open scholarly question. Can something unshared still be communal? If you bake a bread no one else eats but they influence the flour, the fire the fold does, it still count as theirs too. Is pilgrimage ever truly solitary or just a recipe with anonymous co-authors? You walk on. The clearing behind you fades into dusk. Ahead the trees arch into a cathedral of green. Light filters through leaves like flour through a sieve. Your steps feel steadier now, not because the road is clear, but because you're not afraid of where it's unclear. You think of all the crumbs you've left, the ones eaten, the ones gifted, the ones that will never be known but still shape the hunger of someone else's day. And you begin to whisper softly the names of cookies that never made it into the record. The soft mistake baked too long, the crumb offered without eye contact, the biscuit that cracked but still held meaning, the crust that held a pause better than a sentence ever could. You whisper them like prayers, and the wind, gentle now, carries them forward. Ugh, the forest feels like a library, each leaf a page, each branch a shelf, and the breeze the hush of readers turning something over in their minds. You walk more slowly now, not because your legs are tired, but because your senses have grown more curious. The dirt beneath your feet is soft. The air tastes faintly of sage. And somewhere ahead you hear a familiar sound. Laughter. Not loud, not wild. Just a soft, surprised chuckle like someone found a joke tucked inside an apricot. You follow it until you arrive at a glade. A small group sits around a circle of stones. They're baking over coals, improvised ovens made from terracotta pots, metal lids, and a shocking amount of hope. One notices you and waves. "Hey, traveler," she says, grinning. You missed the fireball biscuit incident by about 10 minutes. Another adds, but the cinnamon loaf survived. They scoot over and make space. You sit. Someone hands you a slice of something crunchy at the edges and soft in the middle. It's warm, slightly spicy. It tastes like someone told the truth and then said, "But that's okay." You lean back and breathe in the smoke, the sugar, the shared silences. They're not a formal group, just wanderers who pause together for a moment. They call themselves the Crust Circle, not for any particular reason. Sometimes it's about where you pause, one says, not where you arrive. You nod. You understand that now. And here's tonight's historical fact. In several 14th century traveler records, small bands of pilgrims formed temporary baking groups while resting on the road. These hearth rings weren't religious orders or formal guilds, just groups who believed in the comfort of shared labor, shared loaves, and brief, meaningful company. Some rings lasted days, others hours. But their names sometimes made it into local legends like the Sweet Crumb League or those who salted with laughter. The Crust Circle doesn't ask where you've come from. They don't ask where you're going. Instead, they ask, what's something you tasted but never expected to love? You think? You say a mint biscuit wrapped in regret. They all nod like that makes sense. Another says I once chewed a lavender scone while being dumped. Someone else mutters my best kiss happened over burnt barley cake. Someone throws a pebble at him. It's affectionate. One of the group, a tall, thin person with a scarf that could be classified as architectural, pulls out a notebook and jots something down. Recipe log, they explain, but mostly for emotions. You ask if you can add something. They nod. You write, "The bread that didn't rise still held me." You're handed a cup of tea that smells like oranges and afternoon apologies. You sip. They don't stay long. Crust circles are like cloud formations, present, beautiful, and guaranteed to drift. One by one, they pack up, leave behind crumbs for birds and maybe stories for trees. Before you part, someone tucks a folded note into your hand. Later, alone, you open it. It reads, "If you ever feel lost, bake something ugly. Eat it like a poem, and here's tonight's quirky detail." In a few remaining scrolls from the Abbey of St. Benevolus the Mild, there's evidence that monks once hosted ugly bread competitions. The goal was to make something misshapen, cracked, unpredictable, but full of flavor. Winners were judged not by perfection, but by sincerity. The grand prize, a nap and no chores. You continue your walk as the trees thin out. The terrain becomes more open, dotted with low stone walls and lazy goats who stare like they've known you since childhood and have opinions. You stop near a well. It's small, circular. On its stones are names scratched lightly in different scripts. You peer down. No coin, just reflections. You whisper your own name, not your real one, but the name this journey has given you. Something like the one who carried crumbs carefully. The well keeps it, doesn't echo. Good wells never brag. Evening nears. You walk to a quiet ridge and unwrap your satchel. Inside, the bread from the dough mother still waits. You press your hand to its linen-wrapped shape. Still warm. Or maybe that's just you. And here's tonight's open, scholarly question. When we break bread together, are we exchanging sustenance or stories? If one person never speaks but still eats, is their silence part of the meal? Can flavor be a kind of language, an archive of emotion passed through the body bite by bite? You don't unwrap the bread. You just hold it. You sit down. Watch the last light leave the valley. A breeze brushes your face. You smile, not because you know where you are, but because you know you're part of something now. The morning arrives wrapped in a soft gray shawl of mist. The kind that doesn't block your way, just blurs the edges a little, like someone forgot to finish painting the day. You stretch, yawn, and feel the echo of last night's stillness clinging to your bones like gentle crumbs. Your satchel rests beside you, the wrapped bread still unopened. You almost forget it's there until you don't. You touch it gently. No rush. Today the road slopes downward, winding through low meadows, and the remains of ancient field walls, crumbling lines of mossy stone that once told farmers where to stop arguing. It smells like rain hasn't quite arrived, but is definitely RSVP'd. About halfway down the slope, you spot a weathered sign planted in the dirt. It reads, Tavern of Second Tries, underneath in smaller letters. Open for all who meant well. You follow. The path leads to a low, crooked building with ivy in its teeth, and a roof that looks like it gave up trying to stay straight sometime in the 1300s. Inside, it's warm and golden. Shelves lined with recipes rewritten in different handwritings, each one dated and stamped with little wax crumbs. The woman behind the counter grins. She's wearing a flour-dusted apron and a monocle shaped like a cookie cutter. You look like someone who's baked with regret before she says, You smile, frequently. She nods, then you qualify. She slides you a menu titled, Snacks for the Previously Confused. You order something called the Almost Fig Pocket. It arrives flaky, slightly overbaked, and filled with jam that doesn't quite stay inside. You bite. It's perfectly imperfect. Warm in the middle, too much cinnamon, one corner burnt, the way a real apology tastes when it's baked into food. And now time for tonight's historical fact. In several 15th century taverns along lesser-known pilgrimage routes in France and Spain, there were amnesty menus. Travelers who admitted to getting lost, offending a fellow pilgrim, or just failing to understand the flour were allowed to order from a special selection of rustic comfort foods. Dishes symbolizing humility, second chances, and edible forgiveness. You eat slowly as others drift in. One woman orders the muffin of maybe. A man beside her gets the pie that overestimated itself. No one laughs. These are not jokes. These are truths. Served with honey or not, depending on the day. You notice a small wall near the fireplace with scribbled parchment pinned haphazardly. Above it, a carved sign. Lessons we've swallowed. You read a few. Next time, let it cool first. Sugar does not fix everything, but it helps. One crust doesn't define the loaf. Stop over-mixing things that need rest. The recipe changed me more than I changed it. You're handed a quill. You pause, then write. Even crumbs have direction. You pin it gently to the wall. And now comes tonight's quirky detail. A lost 14th century manuscript from a bakery monk collective in northern Italy. Includes what they called consolation recipes. These weren't meant for feast days or celebrations, but for small heartbreaks. One such recipe, translated loosely, was titled, If they didn't write back, at least you ate well. You leave the tavern just before a soft drizzle begins. Your satchel swings at your hip. It still holds the bread. but now also a folded napkin from the tavern embroidered with a snail and the words, "Not slow, just seasoning." You tuck it into the inner pocket. The rain turns into a mist again, then disappears. Ahead, the road divides. No signs this time, just two gentle paths, each trailing off in opposite directions. Left leads into hills speckled with windmills and sheep that look like they read too much poetry. Right slips into a grove of plum trees, their branches low with fruit and history. You sit at the fork, not to choose, just to rest. And that brings us to tonight's open scholarly question. Is every choice a flavor? If you go left and the bread you bake there turns out sour, but the company sweet, did you choose wrongly or just differently? Is there such a thing as a wrong oven or just a different recipe? You smile. Not everything has to be decided today. You pull the tavern fig pocket's crusty corner from your pouch, saved for later just in case. You chew slowly, and behind your teeth a memory begins to form, not of where you've been, but of where you might be going. You choose the path lined with plum trees. Not because it's easier or more poetic, but because the air smells like old fruit and new stories. The kind of scent that makes you think of things almost said and pies almost baked. The grass here is longer. It brushes your ankles like a grandmother remembering your name. The trees bend low, not in defeat, but in offering. You pluck a plum and hold it for a moment before biting. It's overripe. It leaks down your chin. It tastes like something that waited too long but was still worth the wait. You laugh softly. No one's around, but the trees seem to hear. A little farther down the path, you spot a stone alcove half buried in moss. Inside sits a peculiar object, a glass jar sealed with wax and filled with something golden and swirling honey maybe. Or maybe just memory in syrup form. Beside it, a plaque reads, "For the baker who left mid-recipe." You stare at it a long time. You know what that feels like. To be in the middle of something covered in flour, unsure if what you're doing is a mistake or just premature truth. You sit beside the jar. You don't open it. Just rest your hand on its cool surface and whisper something to it, not words exactly. Just warmth. Just recognition. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. In 12th century Slavic folklore, honey jars were hidden along forest trails by bakers who'd left villages suddenly, either due to grief, exile, or spiritual unrest. The jars weren't meant to be consumed. Instead, they symbolized unfinished sweetness left behind for someone else to discover and honor. It was said that if you found one, you should continue the story, not the recipe. You rise, you walk on. The road becomes gravel, now small, uneven stones that click beneath your soles. They sound like a conversation you can't quite catch. Maybe they're talking about you. Maybe they're just singing old pastry chants. And then you see it, a market square abandoned. No vendors, no buyers. Just stalls left half-open, wooden crates filled with thyme, and one lone table covered in crumbs. You approach it carefully, like it might vanish if you breathe too hard. Scattered across its surface, bits of crust spice trails, sugar grains. Nothing whole, no full cookie, no complete loaf. But somehow it feels full. You sit, and suddenly you notice people have been here. Hundreds, maybe thousands before you. They ate. They left pieces. They didn't clean up. Not because they were careless, but because they knew someone like you would come looking. You pick up a crumb. It's hard, sweet, slightly salty. You imagine who left it. A child, maybe. Or a traveler with poor timing but a generous smile. You start arranging the crumbs on the table, not to reconstruct the food, but to tell the story. One crescent here, a sugar flake there, a broken almond just to the left of center. And now the quirky detail of tonight. In some old Ottoman traveler journals, there are tales of the crumb markets, places where no food was sold, but where people left behind morsels from their journeys as silent offerings. These crumbs weren't trash. They were tokens. Notes of flavor passed on anonymously. Some pilgrims believed that eating a stranger's crumb gave you a sliver of their strength, or at least their spice tolerance. You reach into your pouch. You place a flake of your tavern crust beside the almond. Then you take a single coriander seed from your satchel and set it in the center. Your way of saying, I was here, I'm not finished. As you rise, the wind brushes the table, gently rearranging the crumbs into a new story. You don't look back. Ahead, the path narrows again and winds through a series of flat stones, almost like stepping platforms. Some have faint engravings, symbols, initials, recipes reduced to their bones. On one stone, the word wait is carved deeply. On the next, taste. And on the third, forgive. You pause at the last one, not because you need to, because you want to. You sit on it. You unwrap the linen-wrapped bread from the dough, mother. It's cooled now. Still whole, still waiting. You don't eat it, not yet, but you break it open gently and look inside. The crumb is dense, imperfect. Steam does not rise, it's not freshly baked anymore. But it's ready to be shared. And now the open scholarly question of tonight. If we save something too long, does it lose its purpose? Or does the act of saving it, carrying it, treasuring it become its purpose instead? Is a shared bread still holy if it was never eaten together, only remembered? You sit until the light changes, until the shadows turn soft and the stones begin to glow faintly in the evening's hush. You wrap the bread again. You walk on. The trail curves gently now towards something. You don't know what yet, but your steps feel aligned, like each one is a punctuation mark. Not an ending, just a pause. The pause becomes a rhythm. Not silence, not stillness, just the steady lull of something continuing. Like the sound of water boiling. Like dough rising in a bowl no one's watching but everyone's waiting for. You walk through fields dotted with low stone markers. Not graves, recipe stones. That's what the little inscriptions suggest. Wheat tears nutmeg, flour sifted by moonlight. Folded once for hope, folded again for spite. Salted with regret but eaten with joy. But you kneel beside one. The name is worn away, but the recipe is intact. One quiet afternoon. 2 apologies. Half a cup of rain. Bake until something makes sense. You don't copy it. You memorize it by accident. The trail opens to a long wooden bridge, narrow and winding, suspended over a stream so clear it seems fictional. Beneath the surface, smooth stones reflect the light like polished buttons on an old coat. Midway across the bridge, you see them tiny offerings. Cookies mostly. Half-eaten, wrapped in cloth, balanced gently on the railing. Someone left a full loaf with a note pinned beside it, for whoever never got to finish the story. You stop. You reach into your satchel and take out a corner of the bread. Still dense, still quiet. You place it carefully beside the note. No words needed. And that leads us to tonight's historical fact. In certain early alpine regions, travelers used bridges as makeshift altars. Food offerings left on the railings were meant not just for the hungry or the holy, but for interrupted journeys. Those who never made it across. Those whose stories were cut short. To leave bread was to say you mattered, even unfinished. On the other side of the bridge, the path tilts upward. You climb slowly. The stones underfoot are smooth and curved inward. Foot-worn like 1,000 people ask the same question here before you. Should I keep going? There's no sign at the top, no monument, just a small wooden bench and a tree. A plum tree. Not like the others from before, this one is older, gnarled, proud. Its roots spill across the soil like an old blanket. And at its base you see a pile of shoes. Dozens, some intact, some worn to threads. Some tiny. One pair made of tightly woven leaves, another clearly wooden. You sit beside them. No one's here, and yet it doesn't feel empty. It feels paused, like a room that breathes between visitors. And then you see it carved into the tree trunk right where the bark dips inward. You may walk barefoot now. You don't remove your shoes immediately. You just let the idea settle. You pull out the napkin from the tavern of second tries. The one with the embroidered snail and the words. Not slow, just seasoning. You wrap it around your hand and hold it to your chest. You think of every snack you didn't finish. Every cookie that broke in your pocket. Every person who tasted your attempt and smiled anyway. And then just because it feels right, you leave one of your shoes at the base of the tree. The right one, You stand barefoot on that side now, balanced, lopsided, honest. It feels ridiculous. It feels exactly right. And that leads us to tonight's quirky detail. In a handful of medieval Catalan pilgrimage texts, there are accounts of travelers leaving behind one shoe at significant turning points in their journey. The practice called la mitja passa, the half-step, symbolized a deliberate break with expectation. It meant the traveler had stopped measuring the road in distance and started measuring it in presence. You take a deep breath and begin walking again, one foot shod, one bare. The path now winds through wildflowers and old flour sacks hung like flags. They're faded, embroidered with strange slogans. Don't trust a crust without a story. Bake like you've already forgiven someone. Folding is a kind of prayer. A dog joins you, not yours. Just a temporary companion with flour on its nose and a tail that wags like punctuation. It walks a few steps ahead, then glances back every so often as if to say, "You're still part of this recipe." You reach a clearing where a single wooden spoon has been planted upright in the ground like a marker. At its base, a pile of stones shaped like biscuits. You sit beside it. You whisper, thank you, whoever started this. And that brings us to tonight's open scholarly question. When does food stop being about hunger? When does it become a way to witness someone else's life or leave behind proof that you tried? Are crumbs history's quietest archive? The dog barks once, then keeps walking. You follow. A few more turns, a few more flower-strewn hills, and suddenly, the scent of fresh baking returns. But not from your bag, from somewhere ahead. A house, maybe, or a bakery that only appears for people who've carried dough and silence in equal measure. The dog trots ahead like it knows the way. And maybe it does, because after a bend in the path framed by hedges that seem recently combed, you see it a small, crooked house with a crooked chimney and a crooked sign hanging from a single rusted hook. The sign reads, "Bakery of Final Batches." Below that, in tiny hand-painted script, "We bake what you never thought you could finish." You stand there a while, letting the smoke from the chimney curl toward you, carrying the scent of cardamom yeast and one last chance. The dog sits patiently at the door tail, swishing like it's beating time to a very slow recipe. You push the door open. A bell jingles not from metal, but from a tiny wooden whisk strung on a thread. The sound it makes is like someone clinking a spoon against a mug of warm milk. Inside the space is small, cozy, full of surfaces that have been scrubbed clean thousands of times but still carry the faint fingerprint of flour. Behind the counter is an old woman, not aged by years so much as usefulness. Her apron reads, "I need you," and her face is one big warm crease. She doesn't ask what you're doing here. She simply says, "Set it down." And somehow you know exactly what she means. You take the bread from your satchel, the one from the dough mother, the one you've carried through rain and silence and sugar-sweet sorrow, and place it gently on the counter. She eyes it for a moment, then nods. "Still good," she says. "Even if it's cooled," she chuckles. "Honey bread doesn't cool. It waits." She slices it open neatly, reverently, and examines the crumb. She touches it like a jeweler appraises a gem with both awe and amusement. Then she asks, "Would you like to make a new one?" And you say yes. Of course you say yes. She sets out bowls. No measuring, just instinct. "You've carried enough weight," she says, "so this time we guess." You mix. You fold. You laugh once when you sneeze cinnamon into your elbow. The dog curls up by the oven. Outside you can hear the wind plucking a gentle tune from the hedges. It sounds like a lullaby sung by someone who never got to raise their voice but had a warm heart anyway. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. In a few obscure 13th century cookbooks from Eastern Europe, there are recipes called farewell loaves. These weren't for leaving, but for arriving a final bread to mark the end of a long journey meant to be baked with the person who witnessed your return. The key instruction: only begin when your shoulders no longer carry more than your satchel. Your dough rests. You do too. The old woman pulls out a tray of cookies shaped like questions, little spirals, squiggles, some even look like raised eyebrows. Try one, she says. You choose one that looks like hesitation. It tastes like nutmeg and nearly forgotten courage. Then comes tonight's quirky detail. There's a marginal note in a 15th century baking manual from southern France that simply reads, "Cookies are how we ask things without speaking." The note appears beside a recipe that includes no sugar but plenty of spice, perhaps meant to spark memory more than sweetness. Your bread is ready to bake now. You slide it into the oven. The heat greets it like an old friend. While it bakes, the woman hands you a stack of folded linen squares. These are from those who came before, she says. They left them for the next batch. You unfold one. It's embroidered with crooked red thread. I was loved in spite of the crust. Another reads, "My dough cracked but still rose." A third, "You do not need to taste like anyone else." You take a square and write your own. Not stitched, just inked with your fingertips, still warm, still becoming. She nods when you show her. You don't have to say anything else. When the bread is done, she hands it to you, not wrapped in cloth, but cradled in a wooden bowl shaped like a sunrise. Take it to the table, she says. You don't ask which one, you just know. And now comes tonight's open scholarly question. If we all leave behind something, crumbs, notes, recipes, regrets, how do we ensure it nourishes instead of lingers? Is legacy what we bake for others, or what others do with what we left behind? You step out of the bakery, the dog follows. So does the smell of your loaf. It's different from the one you carried. This one smells like release, like finally setting down the rolling pin, like letting go of someone else's expectations and trusting your own flavor. You walk quietly, bowl in hand. Somewhere not far off, a table is waiting. You follow the scent. It's not just from your bread now, it's joined by 100 others. Some sweet, some savory, some braided with things you can't quite name but recognize anyway. They smell like memories you haven't made yet. The path is quieter here. No signs. No stones with clever inscriptions. Just the rhythm of your feet, the dog's soft panting, and the gentle creak of the wooden bowl in your hands. Then through a gap in the trees you see it. The table. It's massive. Carved from a single felled tree, the wood smoothed by time and generosity. No varnish, no decoration. Just grain and knots and the stories of those who sat before. And it's full, not of people, of bread. Dozens of loaves, flatbreads, rolls, buns, rounds, knots, twists, and things that barely hold their shape. Each one unique, none of them perfect. You hesitate. You're not sure where to place yours. Then the dog noses a spot at the end, an open space between a misshapen sourdough and something that looks suspiciously like it was made from chestnuts and rebellion. You place your bowl there, and just like that it belongs. You sit at the table even though no one else does. It doesn't feel lonely. It feels held. You break off a corner of your loaf, not the middle, not the softest bit, just a firm, honest edge. You eat it slowly. It tastes like walking. It tastes like what you carried, not just what you made. And that brings us to tonight's historical fact. In some monastic communities of the 10th to 12th centuries, a ritual called panis communis, literally shared bread, was observed not at meals but in quiet rooms where no one spoke. Monks would leave a piece of bread in a designated spot. Others could take a piece, leave another, or simply sit beside it. The act was not about hunger. It was about presence, about knowing someone else had been there and left something behind on purpose. The dog places a paw on your foot and rests its head on your knee. You scratch behind its ear. It sighs. Far at the other end of the table, you notice something strange. A single spoon stuck upright in a bowl of flour. Next to it is a folded napkin with a message. If you've ever doubted your recipe, sit here. You don't move to that seat, but you nod to it. You understand it now. You look around. There are no walls, no ceiling, no one directing this gathering. Just bread, and the quiet knowledge that someone baked through their doubts, wrapped them in linen, and brought them here to rest. And now for tonight's quirky detail. In a rarely discussed tradition from parts of medieval Wales, it's said that every loaf contains a last breath, a moment when the baker thinks this will never work just before it begins to rise. Local legends claim that if you eat the heel of a loaf and whisper your worries into it, they'll rise too, just enough to lift you off the ground when no one's watching. You pull your satchel closer. Inside are all the little things that didn't make it into the final recipe. Crumbs, packets of spice, a broken button from a coat you no longer wear. You reach in and pull out the coriander seed you've been carrying since the crumb market. You place it beside your loaf. No one sees. That's not the point. The wind rustles through the nearby grass. It sounds like paper being folded, or a recipe being rewritten. The dog gets up and wanders off, not away, just further. You sit a little longer. Then you notice someone has etched something small into the edge of the table, barely visible. You lean close to read it. This isn't the end. This is where you learn how to begin again. You trace it with your finger. You believe it. You reach into your pocket and find one last thing, a tiny folded square of parchment from the bakery of final batches. You hadn't read it before. You unfold it now. It reads, "When you are ready, follow the warmth." And so we arrive at tonight's open scholarly question. If a journey doesn't end in triumph but in quiet understanding, does it still count as complete? If the bread never makes it to a feast but comforts one stranger in passing, is that enough? You stand. You gather what remains. Not your bread, it stays here now with the others, with the stories, with the silence. You walk away with lighter steps, not because the load is gone, but because now you're not carrying it alone. The table remains behind you, but it's also ahead of you. Every kitchen, every conversation over a crust, every quiet meal where someone doesn't quite know what to say but passes the bread anyway. The path is faint now, more of a suggestion than a trail. It doesn't pull you forward so much as invite, like a warm kitchen at dusk when someone hums while stirring and doesn't mind if you don't speak yet. You walk slowly, not from weariness, from fullness. The air here feels baked, not hot, just rested. Soft edges, warm light filtering through low clouds, the faint smell of something spiced just out of reach. Ahead is a gate. It's not grand. In fact, it's barely there, a frame of wood held together by hope and old nails with a sign tacked crookedly across the top. Tried burned shared anyway. You open it without knocking. On the other side, a garden of ovens. Yes, ovens. Small stone ones tucked among hedges and fig trees, each shaped a little differently. Some square, some round, one that looks suspiciously like a cat napping in the sun. Each one gently smoking, quietly baking. You pass someone tending a loaf with a feather duster, another gently blowing on their crust like a birthday candle. No one speaks, but every eye meets yours with the same wordless greeting: you made it. And tonight's final historical fact. In a little-known Andalusian manuscript from the early 1300s, there's mention of the Baker's Grove, a communal baking ground where no one's recipe could be refused. It was believed that even a failed dough, when baked in good company, became something healing. The ovens were always left warm, not for efficiency, but because someone new might arrive and no one should ever face a cold hearth. You find an empty oven. It's already warm. Inside your satchel, something stirs, a folded piece of paper you didn't place there. You unfold it. It's a recipe, but not one you recognize. Its ingredients are vague. One laugh you didn't expect, two sighs of relief. A pinch of forgetting, kneaded with both hands, even the tired one baked in whatever light remains. You smile. You begin. There's no flour, no yeast, but you gather what you have. Memories of plum skins, the soft heel of a traveling loaf, a single coriander seed from a crumb market long behind you. You shape something from it, not a loaf, not a bun, just a shape of effort. You place it gently inside. It begins to rise. And now for our final quirky detail. A monastic kitchen log from the 11th century ends. Not with a recipe, but with this curious line: "We have nothing left to cook, so we will sit beside the warmth, and that too shall be nourishing." You don't know how long you sit, but the loaf, or whatever it is, rises, not into a masterpiece, into something kind. When it's done, you don't eat it. You break it into pieces and place them in a little basket nearby labeled, for those still on their way. Then you wash your hands in a wooden basin labeled simply reset. And here it comes, the final open scholarly question. If a cookie traveled in your pocket, softened by time, crumbled by motion, and warmed by the journey, was it still the same cookie? Or had it become something else entirely? Not a snack, but a story. You rise. The dog is gone. Or maybe it was never a dog, just a guide with a nose for yeast. You exit the garden through a gate with no sign. Only the impression of words once carved, now faded. You trace them with your fingers and think they once said, "May you never bake alone." You've set down your satchel now. The last crumb has been tucked into the story. There's no more path, no more turning. Just the quiet after baking, the silence of something finished, not perfect, just enough. You lean back. The oven behind you glows low. The bread is gone, shared, remembered. But you are still warm. Not because of the fire, because you carried something soft across a hard world. And now it rests. So if your pocket ever crumbles again, if your recipes fall apart mid-stir or your footsteps slow, know this. You still belong at the table. There will always be a seat for you. There will always be a crust for you. There will always be a dog somewhere waiting to walk beside you. Now close your eyes. Let the yeast of memory rise just a little longer in your chest. The story's done. You're not. But that's okay. You have time. You always have time. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.